Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap.
Well, hello there to all the good people of Ohio and beyond. This is Aaron Knapp, and you're tuned into Unplugged, broadcasting without permission. This is a place where the truth gets louder and we dig deeper, and where we always remember, be lawful, not awful. If you want the full stories, the documents, the videos, and everything they don't want you to see, head on over to AaronKnappUnplugged.com. My new home for every investigation, every episode, and every update. And while you're here, be sure to like the video, follow the page, and hit subscribe. And share this with someone who needs the truth. We're building something real here. We're building something fearless. And we're doing it together. Welcome to Unplugged. Let's kick this thing off. Well, hello there, everybody. Good afternoon on this, and happy Martin Luther King Day. It is a fabulously cold Monday. Went roller skating yesterday for my daughter's birthday, which was fun times. And I didn't run into Amber. Amber was kind enough to come out and bring my daughter some balloons and some snacks, and got her a card. And like that, I'm gonna be honest, like that's how you make me want to cry a little bit. A little point from that. I'm gonna get into the deep stuff, but I just want to make another little happy point. While I was there, I heard a young man say to his mom, I was skating by, and he says, I thought I was really getting it out there, Mom. Like, I was, getting really fast and all that stuff. She goes, I know, baby, you're doing great. And he looks back at her and he goes, you know what, Mom? I just want you to know you're always such a huge supporter of mine. I love you. And I was like, I turned around and looked at her and made eye contact. I was like, oh, heart, sad face. But yeah, it was a good day. So now that I've got that out of the way, I just want to thank Amber personally and publicly before this starts for stopping by and catching the last part of my daughter's birthday at Skate World. That's right, folks, Skate World. You should check out Skate World, guys. Hey, they're doing a lot of great things down there at Skate World in Lorain. Support local, skate local. Go to Lorain Skate World for all of your skate needs. Now, today's message is going to be about when process collapses. We're going to talk about the infamous emails that I've received recently. Lorain politics here. We're going to talk about when the law was ignored, folks. So I do want to start this story at least dramatic as possible, because this is where the truth lies, right? Like, it's not in it's not in a courtroom, and it's not a headline. It's not in a heated meeting or a viral post, right? It starts in an email, in a statute, and the kind of boring ass compliance work that's supposed to keep people out of trouble if anybody bothers to do it, right? But in May of 2023, I sent written notice to the city of Lorain officials. Let me adjust this a little bit. That I wanted an investigative report, or this investigative report they had been reposted online, and it contained material Ohio law isn't allowed to be publicly disseminated. Now, I didn't say that vaguely. I didn't hint at it. I cited it by statute. I named it. I named the problem, right? They had posted a juvenile's records online. I explained the exposure. I asked for redaction or removal. I stated plainly that compliance would resolve the issue. That wasn't activism, wasn't agitation, wasn't harassment, sure wasn't a tax. And that's actually statutory notice required by law. And I am a licensed professional and required by law to do so. So, Ohio law is explicit about that and what happens once notice is given. Once a public office has been informed that protected material is being disseminated, right, to the public, continued publication is no longer accidental. It's knowing conduct. That's the fulcrum here. Everything that follows pivots on whether the officials themselves chose to deal with the violation or deal with the person who pointed it out. That's important. What should have happened next is straightforward. Someone from the law department should have reviewed the report against the statute. Someone should have made a redaction decision. Someone should have temporarily taken it down from pending, for pending review. Someone should have written back and said, "Up, you are correct," or "Here's why you're wrong." None of that initially happened. Instead, the subject changed drastically. Within days of the conversation inside the city, government stopped being about a report that should have been or should not have been online. And I verified this with other members of the juvenile court because I was working there at the time. I mean, for God's sakes, if you don't believe I was working there at the time, what you should do is, you know what? I should do this. We should records request all the Christmas cards that were sent in December of 2022. Well, specifically, so they don't say it's overly broad. Request specifically the Christmas card sent out in 2022, Garen, of December 2022. Maybe November 2022, but definitely in that holiday time frame. That was sent by Koch, not to be confused with the inmate guy, but Koche was the head of juvenile probation at the time that I was there. He challenged us to a countywide program where I was literally in their holiday card. I think it was laying down, or maybe no. I think they had Ryan laying down. But I was in it. Let's just say that. I think I was sitting in the corner reading a newspaper. I was in their holiday card, and you should request that because it'll show like they saw me as an employee. So why wouldn't I not know this stuff? But none of that happened. The subject changed, right? They were looking at me, not my legal argument, not the statute. Me. The fuck. Like, this is what always happens, right? And this is where people get uncomfortable because it's not where the paper trail stops being neutral. The chief of police at the time was James McCann, Mr. Frickin', Coast Guard himself. Boop, boop. Chief of police. James fucking jackass. Fuck you in the ass. Racist. Homophobic. McCann is asked again. It was asked by the Ohio Counselor, Social Worker, and Marriage Family Therapist Board whether there's an impairment issue is what he was asking me about me. That question alone is revealing because impairment is not a records issue. It's a fitness narrative. And McCann does not answer it in a way that an honest official would answer. I feel like would be no. I mean, McCann is actually trying to prove this whole point that I was unfit. He doesn't say that there is no evidence of impairment. He doesn't say that it's a statutory dispute. He does not say the issue is compliance with juvenile confidentiality law, right? Which it should have been. He constructs a story. Now, really quick, I want to pause for a second because if you look at John Bryant, the podcaster and lawyer who does all of this stuff, and I typically have his thing in my file. Let me see if I can get it real quick. Yeah, let's add Mr. Bryant. So we're going to add Mr. Bryant here for the duration of this call, part of the story. Mr. John Ryan, the civil rights lawyer. He's posted a couple of different stories about Lorain police. First one was literally this Hildreth story. So when you guys see online, you go to his page, civil rights lawyer, he's talking about it. Garen shares it. We share it all the time. This is the Lorain jaywalking story, right? When you guys say, oh, these motherfuckers arrested somebody for jaywalking, right? That's it. So John Bryant, the civil rights lawyer, and a couple other people have shared this video. It's gone viral. At the time, it had already gone viral. McCann was so fucking mad at me, it wasn't even funny. this guy was so pissed because I shared John Bryant's post. This post went million wide, right? The parents had posted this online. It never looked good for the city, but he tried to explain it away. There's actually a newscast out where he actually put out a whole press conference on why this was okay. And then he posted this whole narrative that he posted that the civil rights lawyer covered it. He covered it amazingly. It's gotten over, 1 million hits or more, as has his, the one that he covered for, that I put out as well, which was the one on Rivera. But this one I didn't put out. This one, the mom put out. This was before I was doing any of this advocacy work that I do now. Because God knows, I had more than enough work on my plate when I was at juvenile justice. And when I was working a job that nobody wanted, when I was delivering meds from Rite Aid that's now closed to the jail, when I was caring for my clients and per the current juvenile court judges showing up at every hearing, I was doing all of that. And yet they let some little tabby-ass, roly-poly Coast Guard motherfucker, like, for the record, I'm Army. You can see it back there. That's why I say that. Like, Coast Guard is the Coast Guard is a valid service to your country. But this guy is questioning me while writing his Coast Guard Latin motto in his police chief's emails. I mean, for an intelligent person, I was mad. I thought I was dealing with somebody that was similarly intelligent, but what I found out was he had a very low grade point average in high school, and because I requested his records. So when people ask me, hey, you know what, I think he's done great for himself, I was like, oh, he's done amazing for himself. Somebody with a GPA of what he had in high school and went to the Coast Guard has done amazing for himself. In his final year as police chief, this story shouldn't be told without saying he did later get fired because he was being racist and did not follow policy. And I mean, their argument, well, he didn't get fired. He got auto-retired. I mean, retire or we fire. He chose to fire himself. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So now here we sit. James is gone. But that report still stayed up until after he was gone. In the end, I ended up finally getting it down almost 2 years later to the day. When McCann was retired, they took it down. What they also stated to me in their argument was, well, can you send us the link? Because we can't find it. Well, because they had terminated their social media and they had put it on their own archaic website. It was hard to find. But I had a link to it, and I'd always had a link to it. And I kept telling them, you got to remove it from the site. I gave them the link multiple times. So it wasn't like they didn't have it. So they just either deleted my emails or didn't bother to look. So I finally gave it to them again, and now it's gone. Now when you click on that link, it's no longer there. But this had this kid's picture, his school record, his attendance record, his grades, his fucking everything. And in Ohio, that's illegal. You say what you want. James was relying off of a very narrow statute in the Ohio Supreme Court that had just recently been passed that allowed law enforcement to view school records in that nature. If the child was involved in crimes and truancy, they were allowed to narrowly view the records. But the key statute portion that he left out, and that all these people leave out of things, they always like to leave the worst part out, right? So just like Rosenbaum, when he replied to Guerin's lawyer, my lawyer, Guerin's lawyer, that Guerin gave up his right, blah, 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 blah. He forwards this email or this order that shows Guerin's conviction on one thing, but that was reduced to nothing. Then he argues that verifies something else, another charge that was completely dismissed and was found to be false. But the part he leaves out at the bottom, Mr. Rosenbaum, I guess he got tired while he was sitting in his little wheelchair and no, time to take a break. Anyway, either way, he couldn't fax over. I'm assuming he faxed because that's what my attorney likes to do, Bob. I love Bob to death, but Jesus Christ. You people, you older than me people who believe fax is still the securest way to send something have lost your minds. It's not government email. It's definitely secure email. I mean, honestly, I'm horrible about secure email on my Yahoo account, but it's my records I'm sending from it. You can do whatever you want with your records, and I know that everybody's already had my records, so why should I care about hiding them? You, on the other hand, if you're the public or if you're anyone else, understand something. Don't ever send something to somebody that's not redacted, or if it's got your personal email, I mean, your social or any of these things in it, you need to send it via a secure document. If I want you to have something secure, I'm going to send it via PDF. I'm going to lock that stuff up tight as a lock. So I understand the way all of this works, folks. Compliance with juvenile confidentiality is law. You don't get to just post juvenile documents. It's sacred. If that was the case, I could go request all of the custody cases in Lorain County, review all of the custody judges, review all the custody, everything, and look at it because it sure looks a lot like Cuyahoga County and Lorain County. Now, while I can't get that stuff, the parents can share it with me, and they have been. Oh, on that note, side note, if you or a loved one has had an interaction within the Lorain court system with the Lorain court juvenile judge and found that judge's judgment to be unethical, unauthorized, or inappropriate. Also, if you found any of those people to have steered in any way, shape, or form work to certain lawyers or gals, maybe gals I've mentioned before, like AD, you should send those to me. And you can send those to me at A4XBeaverman at yahoo.com, or also at Aaron the Social Worker at gmail.com. Or you can send them to me on Facebook, on my regular page, or on this page right here. You can send them via U.S. mail. In fact, some people have just gone as far as just dropping shit in my front mailbox in the dead of night, no return address on it, no stamps, because it's a locked mailbox. Hint, hint. So again, that's how I got all the stuff that I originally gave to law enforcement that they ignored. And then what's really scared of is all the information I still have that I haven't given them. Oof, that should scare you. But if you're a parent in Lorain County, seriously, that's gone through the juvenile justice system and found yourself screwed, and I know a lot of you, some of you are parents that were clients. Parents, I can't work with you if you're a client's parent without a release from your child who may probably be an adult. But in this case, this kid's an adult now. They put all his records online. I digress. But they bashed him. They bashed his mom. They said that he looked like he was, carrying a gun because he was grabbing his belt like this. I mean, come on. He was holding his pants up because the 3 sizes too big and he was saggy. Every time a gun was found when I worked, and I can say this because it's not confidential, in my experience, not in any client specific case, but in my experience while involved with juvenile justice, every report I read, which some cases were not just reports of clients I dealt with, but other clients, the typical prevailing theme was guns were found in backpacks, front pockets of hoodies, pockets, but never in a waistband. You only see that in the movies. No self-respecting male would ever point a gun at his crotch. And if he does, it's only because he doesn't want to be a male anymore. But the bottom line is that these kids didn't have guns. And even if they did, the argument afterwards that they used some slang for the police and some slang for weapons and some slang for this, even if they did, my argument was never that these people were right in what they did criminally. But that's the way James saw it. The story he constructed was Aaron's anti-law enforcement. What I was saying was, look, guys, when that cop and ATF guy rolled up and the ATF guy started talking, you'd missed your shot. These kids had crossed the threshold, and this is what the civil rights lawyer put out there, right? This is what this guy right here put out there. And this is why I've still got his banner up. Because he put it out there. As a lawyer, he said, look, you can't just go in. Once they crossed the threshold, they were not allowed to be forced back out. So what did they do? They forced mom to try and force them back out. They brought mom into an interview room, same interview room they brought me into when they interviewed me. I straight up told them when we came in, I said, we're recording. I said, good, so am I. They want to turn Ray's actions against me into somehow me being the problem. when in reality, your government can't do that. So again, they brought the mom in there. They trashed her. They said she committed interference or whatever. The bottom line is it was a physical act they accused her of, and she didn't do anything. She just sat there on her porch. But she pled guilty to it because that's what poor people do. That's what all of us do. Most people that don't even know the law will do that. But somebody that's got a few kids to support and has all this stuff, and you're given a minor misdemeanor to plead guilty to, you're going to take it because it's nothing. Take the hit, move on, feed your kids. That's none of the system saw it. And that's not how James sold it. But regardless of whether she pled guilty to obstruction or not, regardless of anything else that happened, the one thing that was illegal was that James McCann put all of this information online. And when notified about that by me, who was a member of the juvenile court, who saw all of this information online and said, you can't have that. And the worst part about it was there was a letter from the client. One of the clients had to write to a judge that was included inside this packet of evidence that McCann put online. That's the problem. That's what involved the juvenile court where I worked. I was like, dude, and he was basically bashing the juvenile court, saying it's their fault because they let this kid out. I think he named Judge Swinski at the time. He said it's Swinski's fault or someone's, but I think it was Swinski's fault that this happened. And so I thought I was standing up for my juvenile court in Swinski, Glass, and Janik, and the rest of the juvenile court judges who used to treat me with respect and called me the expert. But I found out wrong. Once they got a bullshit report from McCann, verified by Judge Sherry Glass to my face. She said straight to my face, I've said this 1,000 times, and I'll do it right now on whatever thing you need me to do it on here. Here's a Bible right here, right? I got a Bible in my right hand, and I think I got a Quran in my left. Judge Sherry Glass, so help me God, whichever one exists, strike me down if I'm telling an untruth, stood outside of Renounce Denounce across from this police department and stated about James McCann in regards to me after I was out there for Renounce Denounce, the only person at public level they let into that class because I was a social worker and I worked with my kids and they voted me in. I said to her, talking, just chatting. McCann came up. She says to me, that man only cares about himself. That man was down here, complaining to us at the juvenile court about somebody that works at the juvenile court, and now we have to fire him because of his complaints. And I said to her at the moment, knowing what I'd been going through, are you telling me I'm fired? And she says, and I shit you not, I gotta go. She didn't know who she's talking to. So whichever one you swear on, so help me God. That's what that woman said to me. And never said another word until she saw me at the town hall when she said hi to my dog. She's still on my Facebook page. I like her. She's a cool chick. She was good to my clients. But it doesn't change the fact that she told me that James McCann did this, sitting police chief, and that they then signed a letter or allowed Tim Weitzel to sign a letter on their behalf that said that they were going to fire me. The expert, the guy that they leaned on that said that was the only social worker they had ever had that showed up to every client's court hearing. I was the only social worker that all the lawyers agreed showed up for their clients. Go ask them. Go ask people like Rewalk running for judge. Go ask them. Go ask these motherfuckers. Go ask the juvenile probation department. I was in their motherfucking goddamn Christmas card. But no, the second James McCann's roly-poly ass pops into the scene, I'm done. I'm garbage. Please. Anyway, back to the story at hand. James constructed a story. He questioned my role as an officer of the court, which I was, because I became a guardian ad litem, which they tried to fire me from too. We'll get into that later, maybe. Actually, I don't think I include that in here. By the way, Tim Green's being charged with sexual harassment charges now. Karma. Well, all this stuff started coming down lately. I started to wonder if I accidentally had a few too many one night and made a deal with the devil because all of the people that I don't like started having things happen to them. But McCann questioned my role as officer of the court. He characterized my advocacy as sticking my nose into everything. That's a quote. And he referenced coordination with law department and the prosecutor. Oh, by the way, hold on. I gotta actually take this ad down. Hold on. Anyway, remember the civil rights lawyer is the one that posted those two different videos on the Lorain Police Department. So check him out. He raises the possibility of contacting my employer. James does. That's McCann, unless instructed otherwise. And he says that to my board of ethics, Bill Haggerty, the head of my board of ethics. Right? What the fuck did he have any business doing that for? I hadn't broken any laws. I committed no crimes. But yet here he is suggesting to my board, without having zero interaction with me, that I'm somehow unhinged, insane, crazy. And this has happened immediately after statutory notice was given, right? Not months later, not after, any finding, not after misconduct was cited, after a citation to Ohio law. The timing is not accidental. That is what retaliation looks like in its easiest and earliest forms. It's not punishment yet. It's a narrative preparation. It is the laying of the groundwork so that the law cannot be attacked. The person can be. And this is where I want listeners to understand something very critical. Nothing in that email engages the statute. I cite it. Nothing in it disputes the law. Nothing in it explains why the report could remain online. Instead, it reframes a compliance issue as a personal and professional problem. That's the pivot in the original sin of this entire saga. Because from there, the pattern never changed. The law is never rebutted. It's ignored. And every time the law is ignored, the focus on me intensifies. I continue to communicate in writing. I continue to cite state statutes. I continue to ask for correction. And at the same time, I set a boundary. I request that James McCann stop emailing me directly and communicate by U.S. mail because he was being a jerk and he couldn't control himself. And so when using his state email address, I no longer wanted him to respond from there. I explained that because my boss talked to me about this, right? She said, bad things are going to happen if you guys keep emailing. And so I said, you're right. And so it was recommended to me in juvenile justice by Michelle, my supervisor, who said, I don't want you emailing him anymore from his professional email address. I think it's bad for both of you. You're going to both end up terminated, and it's just a bad call. Michelle is the head of juvenile justice for a reason. She's smart. She's right. So I asked James, stop emailing me directly and communicate by U.S. mail only. I explained that continued contact is unwarranted and distressing, and I put it in writing. And I told him, it's going to end one way, both of us unemployed. I'm unemployed. He's unemployed. Whoops. And the chief of police responds in writing that he will continue to email me anyway because it's easier for him and that it's easier to track. And that sentence matters more than people realize because from that moment on, the volume and method of communication is no longer mutual. They're imposed, right? It is when the same officials later describe my correspondence as excessive or harassing, they omit the fact that they refuse the alternative method I explicitly requested. It's not incidental. That's control. At the same time, the city's position on public records began to fracture. On one hand, the city acknowledges responsive records exist and invokes Ohio law and revised code 149.43, claiming the volume is too large to send electronically and offering inspection instead. That admission locks in the existence of the records. You cannot offer inspection of records that do not exist. And on the other hand, the city later pivots into flat denials and says no such records exist in regards to these emails McCann sent. Requests have already been fully answered. There's nothing more to produce, but positions cannot be true. That contradiction will matter later, right? That's what they said. Because records that supposedly did not exist somehow found their way into the hands of private citizens like Lorraine Ritchie when disclosure becomes useful. But before we get there, something else happens that changes the stakes completely. The report stays online. They don't give a shit. They just keep this kid's information online, his picture, his juvenile records. I still have a copy of it. his attendance records. I mean, I know this because when his parents contacted me and thanked me for advocating for him, I said, look, I shouldn't know shit about your kids. I'm not your worker. But now that they've exposed this on me, I owe a diligence to my profession and my fellows at the schools. Get your kid to school. That attendance record's horrible. I mean, James wasn't wrong about the attendance records. He wasn't wrong about a lot of things involving that case. What he was wrong is he posted shit online that he shouldn't have. I don't give a shit. You want to embarrass somebody, do it on your own dime. Don't do it on the juvenile court's dime. That was all I was ever saying. And now look where they're at. I'm not their biggest fan either. See how this works? This is how these train of events works. I was standing up for the juvenile court, the very people that I have to go after now. I can't explain this to any of you any better than I am right now. Like, would a reasonable person reasonably believe that these things that are happening to me were isolated events, that they weren't coordinated? So after I know someone stays online through internal discussions, it stays online. By the way, this is going to be a long podcast, guys, in a couple hours. So there'll be some breaks and whatnot. You feel free to come and go as you please, but it'll always be online. It stays online long enough for third parties to find it, read it, react to it. The email city officials expressing fear and alarm. And here's the inversion becomes unmistakable. Instead of treating those reactions as proof that the report should have never been public, officials treat reactions as proof that I'm somehow dangerous. Aaron, for reporting these things, needs to be investigated. James in the city leaves the report online, refusing to take it down. I've warned them that it contains protected material. They don't care. People react to the contents of that report. Now, I've told them this is my obligation as a social worker. If I didn't react and didn't do what I was doing, I would be guilty of failing to follow my oath of my own code, my ethical code, which is much stronger than apparently city councils or even the lawyers. Officials then point to the reaction and say, well, look how concerned everyone is about Aaron. Well, yeah, because James McCann and Mary quite contrary and other city officials with emails that end in @City of Lorraine have been running their yaps about me. Why would they believe Aaron? Why are they going to believe A4X Beaverman at yahoofucking.com over, Mary Springowski, councilwoman at large at cityoflorraine.com, or Ray Carrion at cityoflorraine.com, Safety Service Director Ray Carrion, or Mayor Jack Bradley, or Sheriff Jack Hall, or Prosecutor Tony Sillo, or that's right, former Chief of Police James McCann. Come on down. You guys are the next contestants on Go Fuck a Citizen. That's right. Go Fuck a Citizen, the latest game show that's introduced to all of us. But hey, the city leaves a report online. They don't give a fuck. And this is where that speculation enters the records, right? All these emails that they start to talk about what might happen, about hoping no one gets hurt. Who the fuck's going to hurt you, me? About future violence that has no evidentiary anchor in anything I've done or said. Fear replaces facts. Reaction replaces conduct. And when that fear is finally subjected to evidence, it all collapses. Law enforcement investigated me. The allegation is delayed. It's hearsay. Passes through multiple intermediaries. There's no recording, no direct threat. The sheriff closes the matter. That was with Tia Hilton. Prosecutor Amerka, who's now a judge, reviews it independently and declines to file charges. The memo was explicit. They tried to hide it, but it literally showed no admissible evidence, no prosecutable case. That should have been the end of this bullshit, but it wasn't, because once criminal law says no, well, what comes next is not safety, it's strategy. And this is where Ray Carrion enters the story in a way that cannot be explained. Carrion wasn't a stranger to me. He was my Ward 6 council member. He later became Safety Service Director of the City of Lorraine. He accepted my complaint in that role against McCann. He sat on my porch, he talked to me. He held himself out as a neutral administrator who would ensure that the issue was reviewed. I'd get the meetings I wanted. Then months after that supposed investigation was supposed to happen, or I was supposed to get those things, I never got them. Then he was asked, once he became Safety Service Director, to actually do a full-on investigation And in that investigation, he sends it to me and basically says, I found no fault in what James did. Basically, you were at fault because later, after this happened, you went down to the county courthouse and caused a stir in JD's office. And that gives us the right to say proactively or preemptively, we can just exclude what happened against you as that's just par for the course with Aaron. He stated, he sent me an email that detonates the entire good faith, right? Though he sends this email to Mary Springowski and he says, when Mary's complaining about feeling unsafe around me, again, a lot. Watch the video, I'm not out there hurting anybody. Ray wrote, the city is looking for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp, parentheses, George Patton. That's me. Not to fix the report, not to address the statute, not to resolve the violation, to deal with me. This sentence is pretty much proves that there was never about compliance. It was about the moment the mask came off. And that's where we're just getting started, folks. So we're going to pause real quick for an ad break, and I'll be right back. Here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp, we like to thank our sponsors. We have a few unofficial sponsors tonight, and they are definitely not paid sponsorships. I want to throw out there a big thank you to Joseph Jones and Eric Jones of the Lorraine Daily and the Vermilion Daily. They have a local news page. You should check them out. They do plenty of great work broadcasting all the news that is the news that you want to have in Lorain and Lorain County. So check them out. Also, please, if you need any legal services, feel free to reach out to Robert Gargas. You can find him listed online. He's a fine attorney and comes highly recommended by yours truly. And last but not least, I want to mention DNC Radio. Please make sure you check out one of the up-and-coming internet hip-hop stations and all of their shows. They put on a lot of shows. You have the Never Outdone show. You also have the Eric Bowen show, Speak Up, Speak Out. So please make sure you guys check them out as well if you're looking for your latest and up-to-date hip-hop artistry. Thank you. There we go. So now we are going to take these people one by one, and we're going to talk about like what they did and how it played out, what power they held, what lawful options they had, and why they chose escalation instead of de-escalation. So now we get into how each office failed its role and why that failure was not accidental. And when you strip this down, the story down itself to the essentials, what makes this whole thing unbearable is not the mistakes that were made, folks. I feel like I'm just too low. It's that at every point where systems had a lawful ramp to get off, someone with authority chose not to take it. I mean, that's not just one person. It's not about one rogue decision, as Mary would say. I'm going to go rogue with my emails, right? It is about the sequence of those failures, those role failures that make sense when you understand that each person was empowered to do what they deliberately chose to do, something else instead. Like start with James McCann. Because he's the first official who had both notice and power. McCann was not a passive recipient of information. He was the chief of police, the head of the department that routinely handles sensitive records, juvenile material, and confidentiality constraints. He knew exactly what juvenile confidentiality meant and what the statutes were. And if you don't believe that, you're a fucking idiot. He's a chief of police, for God's sakes. He knew what it meant when someone cited them in writing. And once he received notice that a report containing protected material was publicly available online, he had a clear lawful option available to him. He could have ordered the report taken down pending review, right? He could have directed the matter to legal counsel like Riley upstairs, strictly for statutory analysis, right? He could have said in writing that there was no evidence of impairment and that the issue was purely administrative. He did none of these things. Instead, McCann immediately reframed the issue away from records compliance. I mean, he did write an answer at some point that said, we checked in on our own actions and found no actions of wrongdoing, and basically told me to fuck off in no uncertain terms. It was polite, I'll give you that. Galinas wrote it. But then he reframes this whole scenario and he starts calling my board. He sends correspondence to the Ohio CSW MFT board, which is the counselors board that I work for, licensed under as a social worker. And it's not defensive, right? The correspondence he wrote wasn't defensive. It was narrative. He doesn't deny impairment. He doesn't disclaim concern. He injects character judgments, questions professional roles, and references coordination with prosecutors and the law department. Surprised they even won that claim with my board, but it's just that I was legal and they were legitimate. I mean, surprised you go to a social worker board and they, whatever. But they don't just always find us innocent because we find ourselves guilty more often than not. I was legitimate because I was ethical. That's not how someone behaves when they're confident the law's on their side. That's how someone behaves when they're preparing for cover. That was what James was doing. The timing is everything. This exchange happens immediately after I gave statutory notice. Not after any misconduct, not after any escalation, after a citation law that temporal proximity is what retaliation analysis lives on, folks. But even without targeted legal framing, the logic is obvious. The moment the law became inconvenient, the messenger became the problem. McCann's conduct becomes even more telling when you look at his handling of boundaries. Like when I explicitly requested that communication shift to U.S. mail, he didn't claim it was impossible. He didn't cite policy. He didn't assert legal obligation to continue emailing. He said he would keep emailing me because it was easier for him. It was his preferred method of communication. Jackass. That's not an administrative necessity. That's dominance. That establishes that from that point forward, the method of volume of communication was dictated by the state actor, not mutually chosen. Every later reference to my correspondence as excessive must be read through that lens. You can't force a channel and then complain about the fucking traffic. Out. There's a rule of law. The whole law department, right? Because this is where that story begins to stop being personality and starts being about institutional protection. Patrick Riley, law director. Joseph Levesque, assistant law director, head of the police law. They weren't spectators. They were the legal firewall that should have stopped this from metastasizing. And once statutory notice was given, their role was not to manage, right, irritation or minimize exposure. Their role was to evaluate compliance. Their role was to evaluate compliance and advise correction. What the record shows, instead of this strategic obstruction, public records requests that should have been straightforward were like met with this mutually exclusive positions. At one point, the city acknowledges that they exist and cites volume as the reason they can't be transmitted electronically. That's an admission. Later, the city points out and asserts that no such records exist or that everything's already been produced. That's a denial. Both cannot be true. Lawyers know that. The law department knew that. That contradiction does not happen accidentally. It happens with the goal shifts from compliance to containment. The law department's silence on the underlying statutory issues is just as damning as its contradictions. At no point do Riley or his little biatch Levesque write back and say, hey, the juvenile confidentialized statutes do not apply. At no time do they ever offer a legal justification for keeping the report online. At no point do they provide exemption analysis that explains continued publication. Instead, the legal energy is spent on narrowing requests, denying existence, and later facilitating selective disclosure when disclosure serves a different purpose, their purpose. That's not lawyering. That's damage control, folks. Mary's role is no different. Miss Mary, quite contrary. Miss Springowski's role is quite different, but no less serious, because she sits at the intersection of awareness and action. Now, mind you, I'm going to pause for a second on this one and just say about Mary. I feel like Yeah, I bumped up against her a couple of times, but I had never really confronted her. Yeah, I supported Garen, but I wasn't going after her because for the majority, I didn't see a lot of stuff she did. She threw a lot of rhetoric out, but for the most part, most of what she did was on the up and up that I saw. Well, then I saw otherwise. So that's kind of where we're at now. And I've seen it otherwise, and I've seen what she's done. But you have to understand that why Mary sits at this intersection of awareness and action is she's a councilwoman at large. She's an at-large councilwoman that controls our whole city, right? And as a city council member who is at large, she's informed by McCann, the sitting chief of police, that he has initiated a complaint against me. Now, when he sent that email that they sent to me recently, then that single fact kind of destroys the whole idea or claim that she was unaware of the existence of records or investigations or escalation. And I'd like to think that any other city council wouldn't have been at that point either, because Mary just does this. Now, a complaint initiated by the police chief generates records as a matter of course. And we'll know if that happened, by the way, when the city finishes complying with the 9 other requests that went with that records request, which was 10 other requests, all of the records of all of the city council members. So I'm supposed to have 11 files on every city council member. I narrowed it to Mary for the first portion. It was the most important. It didn't mean I did away with the other 10 requests. So despite that knowledge, Springowski, later will transfer investigative materials, transmit them with all kinds of shit about my licensing and my replies and my arguments, right? She sent this whole fucking email to Lorraine Ritchie. I don't know who this old decrepit bitch is. She's apparently some wife of some guy that worked for the city of Lorraine forever. She used to be friendly with Mr. Gargis, but from what I've seen from her emails, she talked mad crap about him. But of course she did, because she was forwarded all these emails from Mary Springowski. Now, if you're armed with all of this stuff and you already know how the city attacked me, and you've been given responses I've sent in, you've been given stuff I would reasonably request be redacted before it's sent out, that you didn't redact, that you just sent to Lorraine Ritchie. Who the fuck is she? You sent my records to some random lady that didn't even ask Mary? Come on, bro. That's really not the way that the public records process works. Lorraine didn't make a request. There was no routing through records custodian, no overredaction review. There was no exemption analysis. That act alone collapses any neutrality. Even if the records were ultimately going to be public, because I sent them to a public email address, Ohio law does not permit elected officials to decide unilaterally who receives them and when. Process is the safeguard. Bypassing that is the violation. Think about that. So Lorraine Ritchie, who runs her little 600-person, 700-person page, and again, I get it. I've only got that many on my page right now. I don't really care. I see my reach. This lady's been following me since I feel like 22, 23, and just reporting on me to city council, to law department, this citizen. And I didn't realize why. Now I do, because Mary was sending her email after email about me, both in my role as Aaron Knapp and in my advocacy role as George Patton, both prior to the change and after. Because Carrion's role, we're going to get to that. Now, that brings us to Ray Carrion, because his role really is it's important. It's the most important, personally corrosive, and the most revealing, if you ask me. Carrion was not a distant administrator, right? He's not just encountering me as a name on a screen. He literally was my Ward 6 council member before he became safety service director. And Baez took over. And then Arroyo took over, all his friends. He knew me as a constituent. He knew my work. He knew the context in which I was, which I raised the issue. He sat on my front porch, for God's sakes. And when he accepted my complaint in an executive role, though, as safety service director, he did so with that knowledge, though. And with the authority to ensure neutral, lawful handling, right? Initially presented himself as exactly that, an executive who would oversee review, the official who would make sure that things were evaluated properly. That posture matters because it creates reliance, right? When someone comes to you and says, in good faith, and says, I'm going to do these things, and you accept them in good faith in that role. You assume the duty to act in good faith. What followed was not good faith from Ray. The so-called investigation they did, and it bore my name, right? Didn't have James's name on it. Didn't say McCann investigation, which is who it was supposed to be about, and his actions into me. Should have said ethics investigation, but neither name. It did not focus on the unlawful publication of protected material that he did, right? Didn't talk about the fact that it was still up or any of those juvenile court documents were still up. It did not result in a correction. It did not produce any findings of compliance. Instead, what it did was it centered entirely on me, my behavior, my credibility, my managing the person who raised the issue rather than fixing the issue itself. Investigations are named for misconduct, folk, not messengers. The fact that this became the Knapp investigation, I'm Aaron Knapp, by the way, tells you everything you need to know about the purpose of it, right? Carry-on's email in 2024 removes any remaining ambiguity. He literally wrote, the city's looking for avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp, a.k.a. George Patton. He's no longer acting as a neutral executive. That was 2 months. No, yeah, 2 months. I think it was 2 months after he did the report. He wrote that to Mary. May, I think he finished the report in June, maybe July. But, I mean, it bothers me, and it should bother you, because he's no longer acting as a neutral executive, or, he's no longer acting as my city council member. He's acting and strategizing against a former constituent who raised a lawful complaint against the chief of police. That sentence is not frustration, it's intent. It confirms that the goal was no longer about compliance for him or anyone. It was about suppression. Once the criminal law collapses the danger narrative, once the sheriff closes the matter and the prosecutor declines charges, every official involved has another lawful off-ramp. They can't stop. They should. They can. They should. They can correct course, but they don't. They can acknowledge the failure and move on, but they won't. They do not. Instead, civil process is invoked to impose restrictions that criminal law refused to authorize. Media narratives with the Chronicle continue without legal resolution. They keep mentioning my name in matters that don't even involve me. Records that were denied through lawful channels are selectively disclosed outside the law to Lorraine Ritchie and others. To even Tia Hilton, who later comes after me. The same people who claim records did not exist somehow manage to send them when it becomes useful to them. Folks, that's not confusion. That's coordination and outcome. And, what ties this all together is not a secret meeting or a single directive. It's alignment. Each actor stays in their lane just long enough to provide cover for the next one. Law enforcement escalates the narrative. Legal counsel obstructs access. Legislative actors become an amplify and disseminate. Executive authority strategizes containment. And at no point does anyone do anything, any one thing Ohio law required from the beginning, right? Fix the violation. And when you hear the story told cleanly, without the labels, without the euphemisms, the conclusion stops being about controversy. It starts being obvious, in my opinion. Like, this was never about safety, folks. What it was about was control. What it was about was punishing the act of pointing out a legal violation by turning the system sideways until the violation itself becomes the background noise. What the hell? So, I don't know. We're going to roll into the next selection, our next section of what I would call this podcast. I'm going to do a little pause for breaks to talk about private actors who benefited from the collapse, like how selective disclosure completed the loop, and why once emails left government custody, denial was pretty much no longer possible. We'll get into part 3, which is going to be about the selective disclosure and the moment denial became impossible by Ray, by Mary, by really anyone involved in this scenario, because it became well beyond all their control. And it has. It's become all beyond all their controls, unfortunately, for all of them. So we're going to play another quick one for you. Hey there, folks. Aaron here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I want to give you a quick reminder for everyone watching that the City of Lorain holds its regular City Council meetings on the first and third Monday of every month. And those meetings are not just for council members, they are for residents. If you care about what happens in your city, and if you speak or want to speak on an issue, ask a question, or simply be present and informed, showing up matters. Participation matters. Even sitting in the room and listening matters. You do not need to be an expert on any of this. You do not need permission to care. You do not need to do anything other than just show up. So check the agenda, folks. Mark your calendar. And if something affects your neighborhood, your family, or your future, take a seat, raise your hand, and make your voice part of the record. Lorain City Council, first and third Monday. Your city, your meetings. Those council meetings start at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they're held inside the City Hall. Make sure you attend this Monday's meeting. Actually, that will be this Tuesday's meeting. That's right, this Tuesday's meeting, folks. This is Martin Luther King Day today, so normally the meeting would be tonight. It would be at 6 p.m., but tomorrow, 6 p.m., Tuesday, there'll be a City Council meeting. All our new City Council will be there. You guys should check it out. That's going to bring us to our, next part of this whole little train wreck of records. Because there's a moment in every abusive power process story where the system gives itself away, right? Not through escalation, but through carelessness. And they always do. They always let something slip through they shouldn't. They always miss something because that's why you have multiple eyes on stuff. But they're lazy. And it's this is where the point where officials stop pretending that they are constrained by rules and start acting as if discretion itself was the authority. And in this record, what I'm starting to see is that the moment arrives with selective disclosure to me and others, because selective disclosure is where every prior excuse breaks down all at once. For more than a year, the city's posture has been towards my public records request was rigid, right? Records were delayed. Records were narrowed. Records were declared non-existent. Records were described as already fully produced. Or at times, the city acknowledged that responsive records existed, but claimed the volume was just too large to transmit electronically. We'll split that shit up into 3 sections. At other times, the city asserted that no such records existed at all. Those are positions. And those positions are mutually exclusive, and a lot of apartment knew it, right? Volume is not an exemption. Non-existence is not compatible with inspection. Yet those contradictions were issued anyway, because the objective was no longer accuracy, it was insulation. And they think you're stupid, so that's how they respond to you. They just didn't realize that I'm smarter than they are. And at some point, the investigative materials that had entered the government's custody were transmitted by a sitting city council member, Mary Springowski, to a private citizen in Lorraine Ritchie, who was clearly communicating with numerous other detractors of mine, such as Jeff Castleman, I know we made up at Aiden Fogel, such as Tia Hilton, such as everybody on Lorraine Ritchie's page. So everybody there is now suspect and subject to having access to my personal information, reports that I sent, reports that were sent back to me from my board. Granted, in some cases they would be information, but in some cases they wouldn't. In some cases she would already have access to them, but I sent them to the powers that be because they asked for them. They were doing an investigation, and then Mary just willy-nilly sent them to Lorraine, like no big deal. Now, you can support Mary Springowski all you want, but would you be okay with her targeting you, refusing to answer any of your emails, never answering any of your emails, and then sending things you sent to a city council group email, not directly to her, to private citizens you didn't know, but then those private citizens started trying to fuck you up the ass every time they got a chance in Lorraine Ritchie? At some point, investigative materials got sent out. That's the bottom line. There was no written response in the email citing Ohio Revised Code 149.43, like with me. There was no exemption analysis. There was no redaction review. The materials were just simply sent to her. Willy fucking nilly. That single fact collapses every prior defense they ever had. If records did not exist, they could not be sent. If records were exempt, they could not be unredacted. If records were required review and redaction when requested through lawful channels, they required the same review before being transmitted privately by her. The Public Records Act does not recognize a discretionary lane where elected officials get to decide who receives government records informally based on alignment, sympathy, or narrative convenience. It's not a technical violation. It's an abandonment of neutrality. Selective disclosure reveals intent because it shows that process was not the governing principle. Preference was. The same records that were treated as sensitive and non-existent are fully answered when requested by the person that concerned were treated as freely shareable when transmitted to somebody else, guys. It's asymmetrical, guys. The asymmetry is not accidental. Like when you look at the outcome of the decisions and the control information rather than the flow, rather than comply with the law, that's where this narrative loop starts to close up. By the time those records were disclosed privately, the danger narrative had already been constructed. They already had their whole argument in place. Emails had already been speculated for future harm. Third-party redactions had already been folded into official concern. Criminal law had already rejected the allegations. Civil process had already imposed restrictions. Media coverage had already advanced the frame, divorced from any evidentiary resolution in the Chronicle and the things they reported about me. The disclosure did not create the narrative. It reinforced it. What makes this especially damaging is the selective disclosure does not just harm an individual targeted, right? It poisons the system itself. It poisons the freaking well. Ohio records are released outside lawful process, right? They have a rule for these things. The city loses the ability to claim it values that equal process. Once an elected official bypasses the records custodian, the city loses its audit trail. Once redaction is ignored in one direction and enforced in another, the law becomes a tool, like the law department is a bunch of tools, rather than a constraint. And this is the point where denial stops being about plausibility, because it's not even plausible. You think about this, folks. Like, you cannot honestly fucking claim that records do not exist while then sharing them. You cannot claim privacy concerns exist while then saying fuck it and ignoring them. You don't get to claim, process matters while you abandon it when it's convenient. And I point out like that with Ray Carrion walking through security while I was standing down there. Every day he went through, he ran his bag through, except for the manager's meeting when he was late, and then he just walked through. Shows you what his real intent was. You cannot claim public safety while disrupting investigative materials that were supposedly too sensitive to release through lawful channels. Everything converges here, people. The selective disclosure also expresses something else that, kind of matters a little bit deeply. It really boils down to, what's rarely spoken about honesty. It shows informal acts are used to do what formal process can't. When criminal laws say no and public record law imposes limits, discretion becomes the workaround. Emails are forwarded. Attachments are shared. Context is stripped. And because it's done quietly, officials assume it will never be scrutinized. But emails, remember, once the materials left government custody without process, the story stopped being about interpretation. And because it became all about proving it and proof of what was going on. Like, the same documents that were used to manage the narrative are now documents that expose it. The same emails that denied records now demonstrate that they existed. The same officials who were claiming and trying to claim ignorance, now they're showing coordinating, discussing, strategizing. It's not hindsight, people. It's sequence. And this is where the private actors of the story, right? Not as independent forces, but as beneficiaries of the collapse. When the records are selectively disclosed, they do not sit in a vacuum. They are read. They're interpreted. They're amplified. And because they arrive stripped of any sort of legal context or framing, this in statutory context, even, they function exactly as intended, right? They're just trains, just manage to hit stuff. They're not there to be informative, but they're there to influence the transition, the landscape, whatever. That application does not need to be coordinated in any advance to be effective. It only needs some sort of an alignment between the parties. When officials frame a person as a problem internally, and then private actors receive materials that reinforce that frame, the result's predictable. The narrative hardens, the reputational damage spreads, and then the original whole idea behind all of this whole problem disappears from view. Doesn't go back to the kids stuff being online. It's about how to punish without ever issuing a formal punishment. How do we make Aaron Knapp unemployable? By this point of the story, it should be really clear what happened. It wasn't a series of misunderstandings. It was a progression. Statutory notice was ignored. The report stayed public. Reaction followed. Reaction was framed as danger. Criminal law rejected the theory. Civil process submitted for evidence. Records were denied through all of the lawful channels that I tried to use. And then they were disclosed through the informal ones from Lorraine Ritchie, from Mary to Lorraine. And somehow Tia got them. Somebody sent them in that whole thing. I noticed other people like Sandy Hutchinson and stuff were included in these emails. So many people touch these slanderous emails that it makes each one of them sending it a new republication date in the eyes of the law. Each step made the next one easier. That's what you need to understand. And that's the most important thing to understand. None of this would have required anyone to invent facts. It only required one thing: the refusal to correct the original violation. That's it. Take the kids' stuff offline. Everything that followed was a downhill just deluge of that decision. And now when we move into our next section, we're going to talk about why this pattern is so dangerous beyond the case. And see, this is why I'm going to do this in the middle of the afternoon so I don't doze off in the middle of a stupid podcast, because I tried to do that one night super late. And I was a little tipsy. I apologize. But you can't do them in the middle. You can't do a podcast at 2 a.m. and expect not to fall asleep by 4. But in our next section, we're going to talk about why this pattern is so dangerous, right? Because this case is sort of how it chills lawful advocacy, and why the emails now make it impossible for any of these yackasses to claim that this was ever about safety, but it was always about control, right? So moving to part 4 here next, just give us a quick word from our sponsor. Hey there, folks. If you really want to know what's happening in your hometown, the place to go is Lorraine Daily and Vermilion Daily. From city council and school boards to local businesses, community events, and neighborhood stories, these outlets cover what the big media ignores. This is hyper-local news for real people in real communities. Visit Lorraine Daily and VermilionDaily.com today. Read it, share it, support local journalism, because your community deserves coverage that actually lives here. Here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp, we like to thank our sponsors. We have a few unofficial sponsors tonight, and they are definitely... Tonight's a longer podcast, so I'm not going to make it sit through another round of the sponsorship. You get one per break, and so that's kind of where we're at. And I keep grabbing both my glasses, which is crazy, because they look alike. One of them actually does the auto sunglasses, but they're also a little stretched out of shape. So the ones I tend to wear are the ones that are tight, but they're kind of scratched up. So hence we're here. So we get into part 4 of this, the retaliation, the chilling effect, and why this record terrifies institutions, folks. And it should terrify them, because there's a reason why this kind of story never stays local, even when these officials desperately want it to. What happened here does not matter because of who I am. I'm nobody. I'm just some jackass social worker who challenged the system legally like I was supposed to. I did what I was supposed to do by my ethical code. I'll stand by that to the day I die. And I'll be unemployable to the day I die for that. But I'm okay with that, because I would much rather uphold the ethical code I swore to uphold than ever violate it. For those that say I'm a liar, you're full of shit. For those that say I'm violent, go watch the video. I'm not going to hurt you or harm any of you physically. The worst I will ever do is eviscerate you in fiction and or nonfiction. And that's what chills and scares them the most, is that I am a veteran. I do have a pension. I was going back to work just because I wanted to be a good participant in my community. I wanted to pay taxes. I wanted my daughter to see her dad do something. But yet I was sitting home on a veteran's pension, and everyone, especially Republicans, were making me feel bad. And I'm a Republican because I was on a veteran's pension. And I know everyone says, thank you for your service. And they say, okay, whatever. But people don't, when you tell them you're on a disability pension, they treat you different. So I wanted to be a professional. So I went back to Ohio State. I got my degree, became a social worker, became a clinical licensed drug and alcohol counselor, got my minor in that, and tried to participate in my community. And with the first year, this jackass police chief starts retaliating against me for doing exactly what Ohio State taught me every single fucking year to do in their damn ass catharsis training. What do you see? You see someone doing something. So what do? You hear someone saying the N-word in a group of friends about a joke. Do you laugh? Do you participate? Do you say nothing? Or do you call it out? Guess what? Always the right answer is at Ohio State with the catharsis training. That's right. Call it out. Option C or D, whatever it was. And they don't tell you how that can be reacted to by people who want to be violent, visual, or don't believe in what you believe in. But I took that shit seriously until they took it away from me. I still want to be a social worker. I'd love to go back to work. I would take my job back at juvenile justice in a heartbeat. You wouldn't even have to go. Well, you would still have to go through Applewood, who won't hire me because you need to give me a supervisor. But I didn't do the job for the money. Obviously, it was what, $50,000 a year. I got good vacation, but you were paying me dick to work with the juvenile population of criminals that you consider the best of the worst. The group of people that you feel because they have gun or violent crimes, they have to go to crossroads so they have a chance to succeed. Who better to help them succeed than the person you called the expert, the person they let in renounce, denounce, the person that was engaged in your community, that was driving to multiple houses in my old police car and getting people scattering just because I wanted to visit my clients at home because I delivered meds and I went to the jail. And the jail nurse would say, I knew I didn't need to respond to, such and such, mom. And then I would go to my probation officers and my probation officer would be, I knew I didn't need to respond to such and such, mom. Why? I asked both of them. They said, because I knew you would. Because I'm a bleeding fucking heart. I'm a social worker. That's what I do. So, yeah, I did. And I kept doing. And I would keep doing. And I keep doing it online. Most people ask me, why do you keep doing this when people beat you up all the time? Because eventually it'll stop being about me and it'll start being about them. And that's what the social worker code of ethics teaches. It's never about you. You call me a martyr, I say I'm just doing my job. My job is to be a martyr as a social worker. When you get me happy, social workers can never be happy because when we're done with this fight, we're going to pick another one. That's our job. Find problems in systems and fix them. It's never ending. For someone with ADHD, it's a great job. It's someone with it's great for me. But that's why all this terrifies them, because it's a reason the story never gets told. It never stays local. People are scared to say it. But what happens here does not matter because of who I am. It matters because of what it teaches every other resident who's watching right now. And for the record, it doesn't just mean residents of Lorain. This is residents of Ohio, residents of your own states. Understand that in most states, this is illegal. In Ohio, it's illegal. Going all the way up, it's illegal. And a lot of you citizens have felt this yoke of tyranny. But when a system responds to lawful notice that you've given by targeting you, the one who gave it to them, that message travels faster than any process or press release ever could cover, folks. Right? Like the most dangerous consequence of this is in this record is not the harm that it caused to me personally. I mean, who gives a fuck about Aaron's career, his livelihood, his kid, his food on his kid's table? The fact that he had a job stolen from him where he was doing amazing things with the community that some people still actually remember before I became the toxic asshole they all claim I am now because they just fucked me into oblivion. But hey, who doesn't want to be fucked into oblivion, right? Recently. The most dangerous consequence of all this is what it signals to anyone else who understands how government is supposed to work. It tells them that citing the law is not protection. The law will not protect you in Lorain County or Lorain. It tells them that doing it calmly and in writing does not make you safer. So when I did it calmly and nicely, it didn't make me safer. It told them that the moment your compliance notice becomes inconvenient, the system may decide to just, you're the problem. And instead of the violation you identified, they're going to flush your ass. That's how retaliation functions in the real world, folks. It isn't announced ever. It doesn't arrive with a memo saying, hey, this punishment from James McCann because you wrote some shit about him and his fat fucking tard ass couldn't fucking bother to be lifted up upon any sort of intelligent level and say, hey, maybe I shouldn't be a dick to this guy and I should address his concerns and maybe remove these juvenile records because I can still prove the same thing against the mom and be a dick to her without putting kids' records online. No, that's when James decided to figure out, as my social work board said when they called, hey, we just want to know what you did to make a police chief. I talk too fast sometimes. A chief, because I know what they said. They said, we would like to know what you did to make a chief of police so angry with you, a first-year social worker, first year, that he bothered to find out that social workers had aborted, that he bothered to contact us, that he used city resources to email us and make these complaints. And his complaint was I said I was an officer of the court. He and the court apparently didn't realize that guardian ad litems were officers of the court, and it said so on their own website. But I digress. I told them the story. I wrote them the story, and that's why they found me ethical. But so I wasn't supposed to know who made the complaint against me, though. Now, they didn't say, what did Chief of Police James McCann do, right? But they didn't have to. I only live in a town with one chief of police. They said, the chief of police. Well, I immediately knew who it was. So, of course, I started requesting those emails because I knew James was too narcissistic to send the emails from his own email address. He was always going to send them from his city email address because with that title underneath it and that at City of Lorain, it holds weight. We talked about this, right? That's why he sent them that way. So once they told me that, I knew they existed. So they're a year and a half of lying, Levesque lying, all these people lying, including Mary now, by omission. She never responded, even though I CC her technically in everything or just put her in everything because she's part of the city council group, right? I don't email her directly, but I put all of them in the city council group email. That's how I ended up getting Thornsbury sometimes. And we got in an argument. He's like, I'm not your council person. You're not my constituent. And I was like, well, technically you work for the city of Lorain, so everyone's your constituent, but you self-righteous prick. I was emailing the whole group. It just goes to all of you. So she knows, and she has an obligation under her oath to do what she's supposed to, but she doesn't. So again, you guys say she's an amazing person, but she's not. She's a liar. She straight up fucking didn't follow her ethical obligations. She does what's best for Mary, not what's best for the public. And if you want to challenge me on that, come do it. If you want to prove me wrong, prove me wrong. I say, and I will state this publicly and officially, that Mary Springowski is ignorant of the law. She makes statements that about things she doesn't know anything about. She has no clue what's going on around her. And she uses big beef statements to beef up her political standing. The people at the UAW, from my understanding, from the multiple people that contacted me, did not like her really in leadership programs, and that she really rode off of her dad's coattails. In the grand scheme of things, I don't really give a crap about any of that. What I care about is that this bitch knew exactly what she was sent. And this bitch took all of investigatory records I sent the city of Lorain in confidence without letting them go through proper procedure of going through the law department to redact and sent them to Lorraine Ritchie, which makes me believe she also sent them to her 3 public email addresses. I want to know who else she sent them to. She said clearly she sent them to her mom, her dad, and her friends. All these people got unredacted emails that I sent to the city without the city redacting them as part of an investigation that was supposed to be internal. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. I mean, it just sometimes, dude, stop. I mean, sometimes it just does that, you know. I mean, when I hear somebody like Mary Springowski saying, None of this was personal. Stop that. So, here we are. This is how retaliation functions in the real world, right? It's not going to be announced by them. They're going to... Incoming now, we have Mary Springowski, former princess, former council person, former councilor at large, current councilor at large, resident bitchy person of the world. She has something to say. She's going to retaliate against Mr. Knapp, and she's going to do it now. Yeah, I retaliate against Mr. Knapp because I'm mad because he sided with Gary Petty, and I have red hair. We all know red-headed people get mad at everybody, and fuck him! Dude, that's not how it works, right? It's not going to announce it. It's not like he's walking into the fucking ballroom and announces it to everybody. She tells everybody that I'm going to hurt her, but I've been in so many situations where we've been near each other. I'm going to have to be honest, folks. To hurt someone like her, you have to touch them. I don't like to be touched. I don't really like to touch other people. Me and my own kid argue about hugging. I damn sure don't want to hurt somebody, because to hurt somebody means I got to touch them. And I don't want to touch you. I don't know where you've been. Ew. But, it doesn't arrive with any memo saying that punishment is for protected activity, right? It arrives sideways. Get a little bit sideways. It arrives as a concern. He's crazy. It arrives as process. I have to do this. It arrives as investigations that never quite investigate the underlying misconduct, right? We need to look into Mr. Knapp and what happened 2 years after he came here and make that part of why we should alleviate the crimes we committed against them back in the beginning. It arrives as a character narrative, or I like to call it more of assassination, that kind of floats free from evidence. And it arrives with just enough plausible deniability that every individual actor can actually say, right, like, I was just doing my job. I just got the email. Dan Nutt likes to do that a lot. I didn't know I didn't take that test. Oh, sure. I didn't know I got those emails. You didn't see every email I ever sent you, Dan? Mr. I want to be a state representative. Mr. I'm getting paid $96,000 being an assistant auditor. You see how that works? Kukowski was once a council person too. Like, shit, you people are all over the place. But your building was built by the Dick Corporation. It really was. Go look at the plaque, left side, when you walk in City Hall. This building, the additions to the building were built by the Dick Corporation. And the people that are named, some of them are good, some of them are bad, but in the grand scheme, I think it's funny that this whole building is named after the Dick Corporation. It's full of dicks. But in the grand scheme of things, what the record shows is not an emotional reaction, right? It shows a structural response by these people. Once statutory notice was given and not rebutted, the system began to reorganize itself around containing it. Not correction, containment. Communication channels were controlled, records access was narrowed, a narrative-like language shifted from compliance to behavior. Outside bodies were contacted, licensees' implications were raised, civil remedies were discussed. And all of it happened without ever addressing the legal violation that started the chain reaction, which was McCann going online and putting that whole kid from the West 22nd Street incident, the Hildress, up online. Others who commented on that recently have said they've seen John Bryant's post and they go, oh, well, there wasn't a crime here. It happened here weeks after, or a few weeks after. All right, first off, any resident that ever lived in that home that was charged with the crime is currently in the residency of the state and was so during the time of the violation or supposed violation that occurred. The supposed violation that occurred was actually captured on their video. They got the video from them. It carried through their front yard, but it was not their home. And that's the misnomer. What occurred, and I'm going to say this clearly for the record, when it started, these three kids walk across the street holding their waistband. The idea is the police and the ATF say, oh, send those gentlemen back out. The argument starts, and it was, well, they were jaywalking. I'm going to let you sit with that for a minute. They were fucking jaywalking. I was offended for them. Like, I was like, ew. If I was the ATF, I'd be like, yeah, we don't know him, but he's wearing an ATF. Like, he accidentally replaced his little Velcro. He works for Lorraine. And if I were Lorraine, I'd be like, I don't know who that guy is. Like, he's definitely ATF. Those are the feds. Fuck those guys, right? The words that came out of his mouth were the dumbest thing ever. Send those guys back out. And then he went on to argue how once they look, John Bryant said it best. Once you pass the threshold, you were fucked. My argument to everyone's always been you were fucked from the second you didn't get them crossing the street. Here's the better question. Why did you dumbass dicks not wait 20 minutes for them to leave the house again and walk back out? Fucking idiots. No, you missed your shot. You missed your shot. And then you went on to like just be total dicks about it. You yelled at her, you argued with her, and then you charged her with obstruction, which she didn't have the ability to fight because you're not going to give her a good public defender. No. All you're going to do is do what you want. I mean, you do work for the people, right? You know, theoretically, you think you do. Asking, I'm in a public area, bro. Your works for the people, right?
Because he's going to say that he can't continue with the meeting because you won't exit.
And that's not my problem. You work for me.
I don't work for you.
You do work for me. I pay taxes. You work for the city of Lorraine. No, there's no agree to disagree, Mayor. Mayor, there's no agree to disagree.
And what they're going to do is they'll just close the meeting.
Close the fucking meeting, jackasses. I mean, you know, it couldn't be any worse than, you know, I'm not allowed to talk about, here's, you know, Ray, this was started all that.
And assure that as part of our regular
this is the safety service director we're talking about.
That we can visit this. This is not a common area because we typically don't waive fees. So it's one of those areas that we'll revisit here as we move along.
Thank you, Mr. Carrion.
Say something?
Then why are we?
Say something?
Then why are we?
You want to get an attitude? You work for me, Carry On.
He's our safety service director in Lorraine.
Yeah, get it. Do it.
Mr. Knapp, let's have
Now it's about Mr.
No,
Knapp, right?
your employee is addressing me, sir. No.
These people, they just think, dude, you guys are used car salesmen and whoever else. Like, Ray, what do you do now? You didn't even have a job, right? You're safety service director. That's it. For your maintenance, I get it, bro. You think you're somebody special. You think your Spanish bravado is getting the better of you there in that moment, though. You know, like, I respect the deep heritage of the Hispanic male and, you know, his passion for expressing what he believes. But folks, like, you know, you can't just start yelling at people like they're like you're fucking flinging shit at a zoo. I just don't understand. Like, you know, they had outside bodies involved, civil remedies were discussed. They did all this against me. It's practical. Anyone who works in a regulated profession understands exactly what it means when a chief of police starts talking to your licensing board. Anyone who relies on public employment understands what it means when officials discuss contacting an employer, which they said they were going to do, and they did. I have the email. Anyone who has ever filed a public records request understands what it means when records stop existing. These are not abstract pressures, folks. These are levers. And the emails show those levers being tested, discussed, and pulled. And this is why that failure of criminal allegations does not restore balance. In a healthy system, it would. In a healthy system, the closure of an investigation and declination of charges would act as a release valve, right? The narrative would suddenly collapse. The pressure would ease. Like the parties would eventually disagree, I feel like. But that doesn't happen here. Because the objective was never about prosecution. It was about suppressing me and my comments. About making me a bad guy that no one would ever listen to. They don't need me to go to jail for me to be ineffective. They need me to discredit it, right? And they were doing a quite good job of that for a while. They were fucking me up left and right in the courts, everywhere, trying to just hammer me. They tried to bring charges against me. Tia tried to bring charges. Everybody did. But who came out on top? Who won? I proved it to you that I wasn't wrong. I came with motherfucking receipts, bitches. What did you want? What did you expect I was going to do? I'm a social worker. I am one of the best trained individuals you'll ever find in social work because I was trained by the Department of Social Work at The Ohio State University. They didn't fuck around. They turned a conservative into a guy that will literally advocate for homeless people. And when you asked me at the, meeting for Hispanics and you asked about ICE, look, I get I'm a Republican and I'm not in with ICE, baby. I think we need a legal pathway to people coming into our country, yes. But I also feel like we still have a right in this country to be viewed as citizens and the government doesn't have a right to just impose their will on us. So most objectively, I'm usually arguing on the side of social causes that usually Republicans wouldn't, because that's how good OSU is. They taught me how to be a good social worker, and part of being a good social worker is finding flaws within systems and fixing them. Call up OSU and ask them. Ask them if I'm wrong. I'm not wrong, because when he sent the complaint in, that's exactly what I responded with. This is what we do. It's like, let's go, right? You're playing Call of Duty. Wow, you really dominated. Let's go. Of course I did. So none of it stored balance. The narrative would collapse. Pressure would ease. The parties would disengage. We didn't have this problem still 2.5 years later. That's not what happened here, though, because the objective was never about prosecuting me. It was always about suppressing me. And the criminal law, once it said no, the strategy did not stop, apparently. It just adapted itself. The civil process was then used where criminal process failed. So they couldn't get a judge or a prosecutor or now judge to agree with them. So then media framing continued without legal resolution. Informal disclosure replaced lawful release. The system did not correct itself. It rerouted. Internally rerouted. And that's what makes this record so alarming. In the end, is because it demonstrates how easy it was for institutions to bypass evidentiary safeguards without ever technically violating criminal law. No one had to fabricate evidence. No one had to lie outright. All they really had to do was ignore the statute, refuse to correct the violation, and then let fear do the rest. And they're good at that. Fear is incredibly useful to power when it's untethered from the facts. Fear doesn't require proof. It doesn't demand cross-examination. What it does not wait for, any sort of charging decisions. Once fear is injected in the conversation, process becomes optional and urgency becomes justification. The emails start to show transition clearly. Concern language starts to slowly shift and replaced by legal language. Speculation suddenly becomes analysis. Analysis suddenly becomes reaction, and that replaces conduct. The most corrosive part is that the fear is self-reinforcing. We've all seen it before. The longer the report stayed online for this kid, the more reaction it generated. The more reaction it generated, the easier it became to justify the escalation. At no point did anyone step in and say the obvious thing, including our superintendent, Mr. Jeffrey Graham, who I spent a 2-hour meeting with recording him, and he admitted that it should have never been online, and then came back later to say that his own department said because Lorraine police did it, there was nothing they could do about it. But this is where nobody stepped in and said the obvious thing. Nobody, not even when given the opportunity, right? I mean, all you had to do was being given the opportunity. And that in itself is the problem, is that you now end up in a situation where you don't know what to do anymore, because everybody's kind of told you what you're supposed to do, but you're not quite there. That being said, give me 1 second, folks. I need to take a quick break. I'm going to put up our sign here. I just lost one of my programs that's running, and I will be right back. DNC Radio, independent voices, local community, no filter. Follow now at facebook.com/DNC Radio OH. DNC Radio, independent voices, local community.
Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no.
Totally sorry about that, folks. Totally sorry about that. I had all my notes up about this case, and I was closing out something. Somebody sent me a message while we were talking, and I closed out all my notes, and I was in the midst of reading from said notes when that happened. So I do apologize for that little glitch there. First glitch in an hour and 35 minutes, I guess. Not too bad. So let me pull that back up here and get back to where I was at. I do so apologize. Such a faux pas on my part. But while we're talking about that, like, guys, just imagine at this point you're me. Put yourself in my shoes and say to yourself, what do you do? How do you fight this sort of power? How do you look at a chief of police and all these people saying you're bad, you're crazy, you're insane, you're unhinged, which is his favorite word that James used, when he just met you and all you did was make a couple complaints about somebody's kid's information being online? Think about that. Think about what would you do if it took food off your kid's plate. Think about what you would do if you'd been taught through OSU that if you did all these things right, if you did all the narratives that they taught you, that eventually what would happen is you would get this outcome. And then you didn't. I rolled into Lorraine thinking as a new, and that's where people confuse me. I don't look like a new social worker. I realized that looking at myself in that skate video. I graduated in 22, so I came in with the naivety of a brand new social worker thinking I could change the system, but with the age of somebody that they thought should have known better. If I was 20-something, they would have just told me to shut the fuck up and moved on about their day, right? But I wasn't. I was of an age that they thought I should have known better. But I was newly inspired. Why would I know better? Why would I know different? When I even asked my own supervisor of juvenile justice, are you telling me to break the code of ethics? No, I'm just telling you they could refuse to work with you. Ew. All right, whatever. I mean, I guess, and that's what they did eventually. They just said, screw it. But hey, that's the part where the role of leadership becomes impossible to ignore, right? Leaders are defined not by what they say in public, but they're defined by what they stop internally. And a mayor, like Mayor Bradley, who refuses to engage statutory analysis, who is also an attorney. A law director who allows mutually exclusive records positions to stand. A safety service director in Ray Carrion who moves from neutral intake to strategizing how to deal with the complainant, me. A council member in Mary Springowski who bypasses records law to share materials privately. And these are not isolated lapses. They're choices, folks. Choices compound. By the time selective disclosure occurs, the damage is already done, but the significance of that goes far beyond the case. It tells a future where the requester, it tells every future requester, anybody, any one of you, right? Anybody that wants to speak out on this, exactly what to expect. If you ask through the law, you will be delayed, denied, and they'll wait till you die. Or you'll be told something doesn't exist. If you're aligned with them, information will flow freely. That's the opposite of transparency. And it's information favoritism, and it destroys trust faster than outright secrecy ever could. And that's why institutions fear records more than accusations. Accusations can be dismissed. Records cannot. Records show pattern. Records show sequence. Records show who spoke when the law was inconvenient and who stayed silent. Now, when you think about that in the terms of the Tia Hilton case, so the first record I got from the criminal side of things was the sheriff's report. And at the time I sent the request to Allison Janascura, she thought I was still apparently on good terms with the sheriff's department. Because when I was on good terms with them, they would send me minimally redacted stuff. The stuff that you would only get redacted, that would be redacted as required by law. When you're not on their good terms, you get block blanket redactions. Redactions like that aren't illegal. They're very illegal. You can't just blanket redact. You can only redact certain lines. And that's what makes these emails Mary sent back so confounding, and why the law department would argue in any way, shape, or form that blanket redactions are legal. All right, Patrick Riley, Joseph Levesque, Bowles, any one of you other jackasses, Kenneth Reiser, any one of you jackass lawyers in the law department can argue to me where you're allowed to do blanket redactions. Find in the law where it says that, and then get back to us. Right? Can't do it. Records show pattern. Records show sequence. Records show this who spoke when the law was inconvenient and who stayed silent. Records show who escalated instead of correcting. And records show who benefited from that escalation. The chilling effect is already visible in the aftermath. People stop emailing. People stop filing requests. People stop raising compliance issues. Not because the law changed, but because the people of Ohio watched what was happening to someone who followed it too closely and did nothing. That's how suppression works in modern government. Not through force, but through example. None of the other public officials did anything or said anything. Why would I? And here's the part that the officials never seem to understand until it's too late. The same record that chills the public eventually condemns the institution. That's what's happening now. Because once people stop trusting you, the government, and the process, they start documenting everything. They record you. They audio you. I've told everyone, buy a tape player. I mean, again, why anyone would not assume any of their conversations are being taped. If I could, I'd wear a body recorder that taped all day, just in case. Doesn't mean I want to go back and listen to all of it, but want to have something on recording that you need, you got it. Ohio's a run-party recording state. I would. That's why I always wear the body cam and all that shit to the city hall. You can't say I did something I didn't do. And once the email surfaced, the story's no longer about intent. It's always about its effect. Now we're going to go into our next section. It's going to close the loop pretty much up. We're going to talk about how all these threads converge into a single unavoidable conclusion, why denial no longer works, why, the very people who tried to manage this quietly are now stuck with a record that tells a story without them, folks. So give me one break here for station identification, and we will be right back with our next part for A-ish. I think we're in section 4. I guess it'd be like section 4 or 5. The Ray email, like the email that Ray sent out in the moment that the mask slipped. This is going to talk about the whole recent email debacle where they sent me all Mary's emails and Mary redacted them, whited them out, put them in her little envelope, brought them down to City Hall on Friday morning, and like an hour later, they offered them to me via digital. I have her online walking in. Yet they said that they in the law department redacted them. Well, if they in the law department redacted them, a lot of them they're redacted straight out with whiteout. Several things aren't qualified under state law to be redacted, and some things are. Well, in this section, they left out a section where Ray told Mary that they were looking for that legal way to deal with me. Now, if the law department had covered that stuff up, I feel like they would have covered that more than anything. Half of what Mary redacted was probably nothing. But because they let Mary apparently redact it, and that's what it looks like to me, because the law department wouldn't use whiteout, it got to me without them checking the rest of it. So the law department didn't follow up. They gave me this incriminating email from Ray. They would have never thought it meant what it meant, but I can see what it means. They also gave me the one between her and McCann where he admits that he filed the complaint against me. 2 total stipulations that if I were the law department, I would have looked to block out over Mary's bullshit emails. But hey, what do I know, right? So we're going to do our quick pause for station identification, and then we'll be right back. If you own a business and you want to reach customers right here in Lorain County and Vermilion, this is your opportunity, folks. Advertising space is now available in Lorain Daily, Vermilion Daily, and DNC Radio. That means your business can reach local readers, local listeners, and a highly engaged community audience. And here's a bonus. For a small add-on fee, your business will also be advertised once per episode on my podcast, Unplugged with Aaron Knapp, as long as your ad remains active on one of those 2 platforms. This is web exposure plus podcast exposure in one package. If you're interested in advertising, contact me now to reserve your spot through Facebook, email, or reach out directly. Ad space is limited and local visibility matters, folks. This was an unpaid for ad by both these individuals, paid for by Aaron Knapp. Unrequested, unsponsored, but well deserving. Sorry about that. Gonna add and remove. I feel like I'm gonna have to update those ads soon. Seeing as how they are all unpaid, I can always make new ones. But we're our next part here, where the Ray email and everything that recently came up on Facebook that everybody's probably here to actually watch. I have to believe that they did this shit by accident, right? I don't think that they intentionally put that out, but it did change how everything must be understood, right? Because this is the moment where concern stops pretending to be neutral and power stops pretending to be reactive. You look at that May 2024 communication between the Safety Service Director Ray and Councilmember Mary Springowski, in which he states he is looking for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp, aka George Patton. That's me. That sentence matters, not because of the tone, but because of the function of it, right? It is not an analysis of statutory compliance. It's not a discussion of correcting an unlawful publication. It is a search for leverage. Let that sink in. A search for leverage against a person who has already exhausted every other lawful channel available to him. Me. By May of 24, the city knew the facts that they later pretended were uncertain. The statutory notice had been given. The Public Records Act had been cited. Criminal allegations had already failed to materialize. Prosecutors had declined to act against me. McCann could get no charges stick, no boards to find me guilty, no findings of wrongdoing. Ethical. State Unemployment Board, whistleblower. Nothing. Just Aaron is fucking golden. At that point, the city was not reacting to danger. It was reacting to persistence. It didn't like me because I wouldn't go the fuck away. And Ray's language makes that distinction 1,000% unmistakable. Looking for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp is not the language of a public safety official. It's the language of containment. It presumes that the problem is not an unresolved legal violation, but that the person who keeps pointing at it is the problem. That sentence doesn't ask how to comply with the law, right? It asks how to neutralize the person that's invoking it. How do we get rid of Knapp? How do we get rid of Aaron, the social worker? I mean, McCann himself said it best. Aaron Knapp is the reason that the city of Lorain police stopped working with social workers. Wow, that's pretty bold. That tells me either one of two things. Either my profession is a bunch of jackasses who aren't doing their job, or the Lorain police chief had just never encountered a social worker before. Which one do you think is more likely? I think it was on James, not on my profession. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to correct these systems. But typically when we correct them, we don't get attacked by a police chief who calls our board. And I wouldn't have gotten those emails if he hadn't sent them through his public email address on his public email, like his government email. Like if he'd used his personal one, I could have never got them, because complaints against my license from my board, it's unheard of to get that. So when I tell people I have the complaint in my board or from my board, people go, how? You're not allowed to have that. Normally I wouldn't be. But when you do it retaliatorily through a government email address, you kind of give up all of those statutory rights that you had to say no before. Now I have something I should have never been given, but I have to be given. And the reason I have to be given it is because he should have never sent it that way, and he should have known better. But hey, let's look for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp, Ray, right? That's not language of a public safety director. It's the language of an asshole trying to contain somebody. It presumes that I'm the problem and that I'm a legal violation. That sentence does not ask how to comply with the law. It asks how to neutralize me, Aaron Knapp, George Patton. And when a safety service director frames a citizen that way, when Ray Carrion, this man who has no experience in this area. He was always a construction guy. I have his files. He worked in the beginning for the city of Lorain, left to go to, I don't know, some other place. Who gives a shit? Came back to work for city of Lorain. then became supposedly our, supposed best 6th Ward city councilman. They wanted to name a fucking pool after his ass that I just want to go drown myself in at this point. And then I look at like the whole point of all of this. So what? So you could say he has health issues and then promote him to safety service director, then give his wife's sister's husband your old 6th Ward council seat, then have him hold it illegally for a year while bashing me on the way out, and then give it to Arroyo, your other buddy. Oh, okay, cool. I know why y'all didn't want me on there, because then I would have been able to get all the emails. I would have requested everything. You'd have known. I would have known what was going on in the executive session. Here's a hint. I'm not going to run again, ever. But if you motherfuckers out there, I love you all. I say this with all the love in my heart. If you motherfuckers vote me in as a write-in for mayor, I won't say no. Or for 6th Ward or for any ward. But I mean, honestly, I don't know that I want to be a part of this scumbag situation. How can you possibly operate in a government? Like, imagine they said, listen, we're going to make you a council person. Okay. So who are the other council people? Well, they're all rattlesnakes. Oh, shit. That sounds dangerous. Yeah, I know. Well, what about the mayor? Yeah, he's a cobra. Oh, shit. What about the city workers? Yeah, they're all mountain lions. Ooh, that sounds like I'm going to get killed. Okay. What about the low-level administrative people? Oh, they're just sheep. Oh, okay, cool. I'm cool with them. You gonna take that job? Sounds like I'm gonna get bit sooner or later. That implication is not subtle. That's the machinery of government has shifted its focus to that here in Lorraine. The role of discipline collapses. A safety service director is charged with overseeing police, fire, and public safety operations. That role does not include strategizing legal pressure against residents who engage in constitutionally protected activity. It does not include identifying workarounds when criminal law has already said no. And it does not include coordinating with elected officials to deal with a private citizen who has not been charged with fucking anything. When that language appears in writing, it's not accidental. It reflects how the situation was being misunderstood, or I'm being nice when I say misunderstood internally. I should say it really reflects how the situation was being directed, controlled, and understood internally. And that understanding is fatal to every later claim of neutrality, folks. They can't claim they didn't know something that they knew. They can't claim that Ray wasn't. I mean, all right, so he got appointed what? November, December. Fuck. He was done with city council in what, 23? I don't know. All I can say is he gets this job and then suddenly he's attacking me. I have your personnel file, bro. You're a maintenance worker. Eat it. Anyway, I'm not going to do that. Because once the objective becomes about dealing with me, the person, the individual complaining, rather than correcting the actual problems that I pointed out that are detrimental to the city's interests, every subsequent act has to be read through that lens. Record denials stop looking like workload issues, and selective disclosures stop looking like informality. Licensing discussions stop looking incidental. Civil process stops looking precautionary. And they become the tools in search of the effect. They're looking for the problem, not finding the problem and dealing with it. The timing of these emails matter as much as the content. By May of 2024, almost 2 years ago, 2 months shy, January, February, March, April, May, 4 months shy. There was no unfolding threat. There was no new conduct by me. I'd already been let go and been dealt with. What existed was a continued refusal to remove an unlawfully public report from continued existence online, and by the afflicted party that the law to be followed. Me. Saying follow the law, going all the way to the end of the world. For people that weren't my clients, they hold us. No Stress J messaged me, hey, we see you being neutral and not taking any side, but we appreciate the advocacy. Yes, sir. I responded back, and you can ask No Stress J this, the dad. I'm not going to say his name, but he said, I said, sir, I recognize what we're going through here, and I will advocate for your family and for your child all day long to get offline, but his info offline at least. But at this point, now that I've been unfortunately subjected to it in a way that I would call almost like information rape, you forced me to know. Now they've forced me to know that you're not getting your kid to school. So ethically, as a licensed professional, I must say to you, get your kid to school. And if he's not going, drive his ass there, drop him off, make sure he goes. Like, that's it. You make sure he goes and make sure he attends. I knew that in the grand scheme, I wasn't going to change this family's outcome. I wasn't their worker. But I did recognize that I had a unique position to engage both with the family and the police department to solve both sides. The family took it and said, you know what, you're right. And they started seeing better attendance. That kid never gets in trouble again. My engagement with the Hildreth family, I feel like worked. I feel like they were also forced into oblivion, wanted to move out of the area, and were harassed to no end by people from out of state, just like the police were. But all of that, Ray's email in this doesn't respond to new facts. It responds to endurance. And endurance is what institutions find the hardest to tolerate, right? When they know they are wrong, but they don't want to concede it. Because I'm still here and I'm not going nowhere. Anybody else would have been gone by now. That's why the recipient matters. Ray did not send this communication into a vacuum. He sent it to a sitting council member who's still sitting, who was just recently voted in, who was already embedded in the narrative. You just voted Mary Springalski back in for another term. And she had already received materials and who would later be involved in informal disclosure outside of the public records process. That context matters because it shows that this was not idle venting. It was coordination, it was alignment, it was internal acknowledgement that the situation required strategy, not a solution. And here's the part that should make every lawyer and every public official listening uncomfortable. There is no corresponding email in which Ray says anything like this. There's no email where, email asking whether the city is violating revised code 149.43. There's no email questioning whether the report should have been removed earlier. There's no email expressing concern that selective disclosure could expose the city to liability. There's no email urging restraint now that the criminal law had been declined to act. The silence on compliance paired with urgency about dealing with a citizen tells you exactly where priorities lay. It's not a hindsight bias. This is written evidence. When government officials like Ray Carrion start, quote, unquote, looking for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp, a.k.a. Mr. Patton, or George Patton, against any specific individual, especially Aaron Knapp, a.k.a. George Patton, who is engaged in protected speech and lawful process, especially Aaron Knapp and a.k.a. George Patton. This issue stops being discretionary governance and it starts approaching retaliation, right? Analysis. Whether anyone uses that word or not, the phrase itself presumes that the law is the toolkit to be deployed by a person. I'm sorry. I misspoke. The phrase itself presumes that the law is a toolkit, right, to be deployed against a person rather than a boundary that the government must operate within, right? So you use it when it's necessary, but not as a boundary. That inversion is the hallmark of abuse of power, even when it's dressed in bureaucratic language, right? It's difficult to say. I want to be clear. It is also impossible to reconcile that this email with Ray's, which later claims that actions were taken reluctantly, defensively, or purely out of safety concern. You don't get to go looking for legal avenues against someone unless you have already decided they are the problem. And by the time this email was written from Ray, the only thing that distinguished me from anyone else that he would stop citing the statute and demanding compliance. Like, that was it. That was the only thing that distinguished me from anyone else, is that I would not stop citing compliance. And that's the chilling effect in the real time. Every resident watching this unfold learns lessons here, whether you can articulate it or not. If you push hard, if you document too thoroughly, if you refuse to accept procedural stonewalling, the conversation will shift. you will stop being a requester and you will start being a subject. You will, and once that happens, like, the law is no longer something you can use. It's something that will be used against you. And that's not our Constitution, right? But that's why this email cannot be minimized. That's why Ray's comment is not offhand. It's a window into institutional mindset at a critical juncture. It shows that the city was not confused. It was not frustrated too much. It was frustrated too much. And frustration in government is, when paired with that authority, is really dangerous, folks, because frustration seeks relief, not correctness. Ray's frustrated. He showed it. Ray showed it many a time. When he's responded to me,
to all of our departments, and assure that as part of our regular checklist that we have for many projects, that we can visit this. This is not a common area because we typically don't waive fees. So it's one of those areas that we'll revisit here as we move along.
Thank you, Mr. Carrion.
Say something? Then why aren't we? Say something? Then why are we? You want to get an attitude? You work for me, Carry On.
Mr. Knapp.
Yeah, get it. Do it.
Mr. Knapp,
Mr. Knapp.
let's have it.
No,
I have that
you're
whole meeting.
addressing me, sir. No.
Now, mind you, when they did that, they actually didn't include any of that in their minutes, which is kind of funny. But hey, when relief becomes the goal and they want to get relief from you, anything that constrains that relief, including statutes, ethics, process, critics, people, voters, they start to look like an obstacle instead of an obligation. Serving the voter is not an obstacle, it's an obligation. But that's the pivot that this email captures. The moment the law stopped being the answer and became the problem. Everything that follows makes sense only if you start here. Little Miss Mary Springowski and the collapse of the war between the oversight and retaliation doesn't just disappear. And the Ray email does not exist in isolation. It does not float abstractly above us as a straight line of frustration. Its significance really matters, folks. It sharpens the moment. It is to read alongside the conduct of Mary Springowski, because she is the point where internal posture turns into external consequence. She is the bridge between institutional strategy and private dissemination. Without her actions, the record would look very different. By the time Ray wrote he was looking for avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp, Mary Springowski was not a passive recipient of the information. She was already positioned inside the narrative, already receiving communications, already treated as someone who needed to be looped in on how to handle the problem that the city had decided I represented. All while saying she would never and had never responded to me and only forwarded all my emails to the law department as my government representative. That context matters, because what followed was not an accidental overlap. It was alignment. She aligned. After the internal communications between her, McCann, her, and Ray and all these people, and more investigative materials that had entered the city, custody did not remain confined to legal custody channels, right? I gave them a bunch of emails that showed a bunch of stuff that may or may not have been required to be redacted, and she didn't care. She didn't send them to the law department. She didn't wait for a request from Lorraine Ritchie. She just sent them. Now, they can say otherwise at this point. They could try to create otherwise, but they better prove metadata that shows it came 2 years ago or whenever it was. But they didn't pass it to the law department for redaction like every one of my fucking requests does. They didn't wait for a public request like I have to. Instead, they just moved outwardly, informally, secretly, and decisively to a private citizen, little Miss Lorraine Ritchie. That transmission does not happen despite, it did not happen despite the internal posture reflected in Ray's email, right? It happened because of it. She's not going to send that otherwise. When she starts sending shit that has that kind of comment in it, of course, then Lorraine can rephrase it on her 800-page, or people of like 600 people or whatever of select government entities that she has on her page, and other precariously placed citizens who can actually make comments on me, including Tia Hilton, and including current government members, and including a deceased police officer, and including moles on my page, all of whom which have internally been on that page and receiving information about me. I can only imagine that there's been more and more emails sent because Mary sent them to her own emails and then sent them to others. It doesn't occur spontaneously. It requires a person with access, authority, and willingness to bypass process. Council member like Mary has all three. Springalski had access to investigative submissions precisely because she was an elected official. And still is. She had authority precisely because her position cloaked her actions and assumed legitimacy. And she demonstrated willingness by transmitting materials that the city later itself treated as sensitive when requested through formal channels. Not a neutral conduct issue, it's execution. Once you place Ray's email and Springalski's disclosure side by side, the story stops being about the individual judgment call and starts being about the role of abandonment. Ray articulates the objective clearly, find a legal way to deal with Aaron. Springalski's disclosure advances that objective by not correcting the underlying violation, but by empowering a private actor with unredacted material that could be used to shape the narrative, i.e. Lorraine Ritchie. Amplify that suspicion by telling her more and reinforce the framing that had already taken hold internally. The most damning part of this is not merely that the disclosure happened, it's that it happened asymmetrically. When I sought records involving Lorraine Ritchie, the city invoked process, the law department reviewed, redactions were applied, exemptions were asserted, the Public Records Act was treated as binding, and this was the city acknowledging, though, through its own conduct, that these materials required care, context, and statutory handling. Yet the same productions vanished when the flow reversed. My investigative submissions, licensing-related communications, and employment-related materials were transmitted to Ritchie without request, without redaction, and without any documented legal review. I guarantee you they didn't have fucking proof that it was ever sent other than those emails that I just got. And that person was communicating with everyone from Marty, the commissioner, on down. And when you talk about Mary saying, I didn't know Dave Moore. Well, you emailed Marty Gallagher, and everyone knows he's Dave's Moore, a little bitch. Whatever. And why were you in a t-shirt? Never mind, Aaron. Don't ask that. Look, preference is the opposite of oversight. Springalski did not act as a legislator seeking to correct an administrative failure. She acted as a conduit for materials that could not lawfully be released the way they were. At a moment when internal officials were actively discussing how to deal with the person who had forced the issue. The law doesn't permit that role. The Public Records Act doesn't recognize a council member distribution exception. It's bullshit. There's no statutory authority that allows an elected official to substitute personal discretion for custodial process. This is where the significance of Springalski's silence becomes so important. As important as her actions. Because at no point does the record, and at any point in this record, does she ever question that the city was violating anyway Ohio Revised Code 149.43. At no point does she ask whether selective disclosure would expose the city to liability in your tax dollars. At no point does she insist that the records be handled through proper channels. Her response to Ray's posture is not resistance. It was compatibility. And compatibility matters because it shows how easily legislative oversight can actually be inverted. Instead of acting as a check on the executive branch, Springalski became an extension of it. Instead of insisting on lawful process, she bypassed it. Instead of protecting the integrity of the government custody, she fractured it. Once that happens, the distinction between public office and private action collapses. The selective disclosure also completes this whole chilling effect that Ray's email foreshadowed. It demonstrates to every resident watching and people beyond in Ohio and beyond that once internal officials decide you're the problem, you're the issue, safeguards will not save you. Laws will not save you. Process will be enforced when it constrains you and ignored when it empowers others. Information will be treated as sensitive or disposable depending on who's holding it, and elected officials who are supposed to be your servants and serve as a buffer may actually instead become the accelerants. That's why Springalski's conduct cannot be minimized as informal communication or constituent engagement. Investigative submissions are not casual materials. They're not taking points or talking points, so to speak. They're documents entrusted to the government for a specific purpose. Forwarding them outside lawful process transmissions from the records into weapons becomes because they're stripped of the legal framing and institutional responsibility at that point. The connection between Ray's emails and Springowski's disclosure is not speculative, structural. Ray identifies the target, Springowski proves the means. The law is not consulted, statutes not applied, the process not followed. And the process is what matters. And the person who cited the law is the one who gets exposed. That's not coincidence, that's convergence. Once this section of the record is understood, it almost becomes completely impossible, folks, to really accept later claims that their actions were reluctant, defensive, or driven by safety alone. Safety doesn't require bypassing, right, of public records law. Oversight does not require empowering private actors. Compliance does not require dealing with a citizen instead of fixing a violation. What happens here reflects a breakdown of a role of discipline at multiple levels, but Springowski's role is the most pivotal one because she's where the internal becomes the external. She's where strategy leaves email and enters the world. Think about that, because before this was all contained within the government apparatus. The people that knew, according to the city, were just people within the city. McCann, maybe his subordinates. None of council knew. Once Mary was told he brought the charges in an email that she sent to other people, that eliminates that whole argument. Everyone knew he brought charges against me, so there should be emails. Look for them. But they didn't. And once that happens, the damage is no longer contained within City Hall. It's going to spread. And spread it did. And that spread is exactly what that law was designed to prevent. There's a timeline here that removes ambiguity and how these requests, the email, and the disclosure overlap in real time, right? To understand why this cannot be brushed aside as misconduct or miscommunication, as miscommunication or coincidence, you have to understand and hear the timing as a single continuous sequence rather than isolated moments scattered across months. When the dates are aligned, when the structure becomes obvious, and when all of it becomes obvious, denials stop being credible. By early 2024, I'm already out here asking city officials, and you should have been too, but for specific categories of records, not generically, right? I'm not looking at these generic facts. I'm pulling stuff. It's not hypothetical. I was asking for emails and communications documenting whether James McCann had contacted my professional licensing board and what had actually been said. Those requests did not appear out of thin air. They were not prompted by conduct, that I was experiencing. And I mean, honestly, actually, they kind of were. They were the whole reason I brought them was prompted by the conduct I was experiencing from city officials and by the information already circling inside city government. I wasn't accusing. I was asking to see the paper trail that would either confirm or disprove retaliation tied to licensure. That places my request squarely inside the Ohio Public Records Act and squarely inside the protected activity I was doing. At that point in time, the city leadership already knew that McCann had escalated the situation internally. They had been sent emails about it. An investigation had been opened. The fact matters because investigations generate records by definition, emails, references, notes, communications with outside entities. Once an investigation exists, the city cannot plausibly claim uncertainty about whether the record itself exists. Council cannot plausibly claim ignorance on the sensitivity of these or the relevance of these records tied to this investigation. And that's the posture of the city when the May 2024 email arrives is. In May of 2024, Ray Carrion sends the email to Mary Springowski stating that the city is looking for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp. And that sentence does not arise during a neutral compliance review. It does not arise during a period of uncertainty. It arises after months and months of statutory notice, after unresolved political or public records requests, and after an investigation has already been opened and closed, and after the criminal theories have failed to materialize into evidence. That email is sent while I was still actively seeking records from the city council. It was sent while the question of McCann's contact with my board was still unresolved. It was sent while the city is maintaining contradictory positions about their responsive records exist. In other words, it was sent at the precise moment when process matters the most and when discretion is most dangerous. Then comes the disclosure, and after that email, not before it, Councilor Springowski transmits investigative materials and communications that it entered government custody to a private citizen from outside public records process, and this is no public records request. None. There was none. There's no routing to the city's designated custodian records of custodians. There is no exemption analysis. There's no redaction log. No notice to me, despite the fact that I was actively seeking the same category of records throughout lawful channels. The order of events is the story. Requests for board-related emails and investigative communications internally acknowledge that the city is looking for legal avenues to deal with me. Selective disclosure of those materials to a private actor, Lorraine Ritchie, while lawful requests remain unanswered, denied or not, is not right. Now, you say what you want, but once that whole sequence is heard in a single chain, the defense that these were unrelated acts collapses. Springowski did not disclose records in a vacuum. She did so after receiving an email framing me as the problem to be dealt with. She did so while knowing that I was asking for records tied to the same subject matter, and she did so with the knowledge that an investigation existed and that my licensing's implications were in play. That's why timing matters more than tone. It's why disclosure had occurred before my records. If the disclosure had occurred before my records request, the analysis would be different. If it had occurred before Ray's email, the inference would be weaker. If it had occurred after full compliance with my records request, it might be defensible. But it occurred in the narrow window where the discretion could be most effectively shape the narrative, while avoiding statutory scrutiny. And while Ohio Public Records Laws does not tolerate that window, it just doesn't. Once a public official knows that the records are being sought, once that official knows that the records relate to an investigation and licensure, and once that official knows that the city is discussing how to deal with the requester rather than to comply with the law, any informal transmission of the records becomes presumptively improper. Equal access is no longer theoretical, it is a test. And it was failed. And on top of that, every time they republish, it creates a new form of defamation. This is why the Ray email and the Springowski email disclosures cannot be separated, right? One supplies motive, one supplies posture, the other supplies action. Together, they show the city has no longer asking how to comply with the law, but how to manage the person invoking it. That is not how transparency works. That is not how retaliation operates, or that is how retaliation does operate. When it's careful enough to leave a paper trail, but confident enough that no one will believe will ever line up, the pages in order. The episode exists to line them up. This episode is the reason. The timeline that eliminates ambiguity, how knowledge, intent, and disclosure converge in real time. By 2024, the city council was not dealing with vague dissatisfaction or generalized criticism. A resident made a targeted public records request seeking emails and communications documenting whether James McKenna contacted a professional license board and what had been said. These were not speculative inquiries. These were narrow, grounded, and directly tied to concerns about retaliation. Though the licensure and professional standing are through it, the requests were made because there was reason to believe that such communications existed and because Ohio law provides a clear mechanism for obtaining them. At the same time, the city leadership was already aware that McCann had escalated the matter internally. An investigation had been opened. The fact of that alone is critical. Investigations generate records as a matter of course. Emails, references, and notes and communications with outside entities do not appear retroactively. They are created when the action is taken. Once an action or investigation exists, claims that no records exist cease to be plausible. Once the council is aware of that investigation exists, claims of ignorance are about the relevance of sensitivity of records tied to the investigation that sought will fail. This was the posture of the city when the May 2024 verdict arrived. In May 2024, Ray Carrion sent an email to Mary Springowski saying the city was looking for legal avenues to deal with Mr. Knapp. The language did not emerge during the neutral compliance review. It did not arise from uncertainty about the law. It surfaced after months of statutory notice and the unresolved public records request, after investigation had been opened, and after criminal charges had failed to produce evidence sufficient for charges.
I have no school tomorrow. I have no school tomorrow.
Jeez, I know. Thanks. I'm still in the middle of a podcast. Go.
Okay, I don't care about your
That,
podcast.
that
Give me a
I
kiss.
do. That email was sent
Hi guys.
while public records.
Follow me, XOXO.
All right, go. No, you don't get to jump on my stuff now.
Listen, I need more.
No, you get your own followers. That email was sent. Look at her trying to glom off my followers. It was sent while the city was still maintaining contradictory positions about whether responsive records existed. It was sent at a moment when officials were no longer debating compliance, but were actually actively discussing how to manage me, the individual raising the issue. And then came that disclosure. After the email, not before it, Springowski transmitted investigative materials and communications that had entered government custody to a private citizen, Lorraine Ritchie, outside the public records process. There was no public records request. There was no routing through any sort of city-designated records custodian. There was no exemption to analysis, no reaction or redaction to the log, no contemporaneous notice to the requester, despite the fact that lawful requests for the same universe of records were still unresolved. That sequences the story, guys. First, targeted request for emails, documenting licensing board contract and investigative escalation. Second, an internal review or internal email acknowledging that the city was searching for the legal avenues to deal with me, the requester. Third, selective disclosure of materials to a private actor, Lorraine Ritchie, and Tia Hilton, while lawful requests remained unanswered or denied. And how many other people did she get them to? She said her family, her friends. Each send would be a different investigation and a different criminal act. Once those events are aligned in order, the claim that these were unrelated actions collapses. Springowski, our city councilwoman at large, did not act without context. She acted with knowledge that records were being sought. She acted with knowledge that an investigation existed. She acted after receiving an email framing the requester as a problem to be handled, rather than a complaint to be addressed. That timing is dissipative. If the disclosure had occurred before public records requests, the analysis would differ. If it had occurred before Carry-On's email, the inference would weaken. If it had occurred after compliance with the request, it would be defensible. But it occurred in a narrow window where discretionary action can shape narrative without avoiding statutory scrutiny. Very, very narrow window. Here's where we say it. Ohio Public Records Law does not tolerate that window. Once an elected official knows that records are being sought, knows that they relate to an investigation and a licensure, and knows that the executive leadership is discussing how to deal with the requester rather than how to comply with the law, any informal transmission of these records becomes presumptively improper. Equal access is no longer abstract. It becomes the test. It becomes the test that was failed. This is why Carry-On's email and Springowski's disclosure cannot be separated. One establishes posture, the other intent. The other supplies action. Together, they demonstrate that the city has moved away from statutory compliance and towards containment of the person invoking the law. It's not conjecture, it's sequence. And once the sequence is clearly heard, the explanation really that remains is not any sort of misunderstanding, delay, or mistake. It really is a choice. The law department and they really became irreconcilable by the time the sequence reaches the city law department, right? And that's where we're going to take next. We got a little bit more to go. I'm going to take a quick break here, grab a quick drink to clear my throat because this can of dry is almost out. I need some water. I will be right back, so please stay tuned. Sorry, I'm looking for this ad. Hey there, folks. Aaron here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I want to give you a quick reminder for everyone watching that the City of Lorain holds its regular City Council meetings on the first and third Monday of every month. And those meetings are not just for council members. They are for residents. If you care about what happens in your city, and if you speak or want to speak on an issue, ask a question, or simply be present and informed, showing up matters. Participation matters. Even sitting in the room and listening matters. You do not need to be an expert on any of this. You do not need permission to care. You do not need to do anything other than just show up. So check the agenda, folks. Mark your calendar. And if something affects your neighborhood, your family, or your future, take a seat, raise your hand, and make your voice part of the record. Lorain City Council, first and third Monday. Your city, your meetings. Those council meetings start at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they're held inside of City Hall. Make sure you attend this Monday's meeting. Hey there, folks.
Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the.
All right, there we go. It's been a minute. I needed to clear my throat. So, and we are almost in the end. So, record becomes irreconcilable by the time the sequence reaches the city law department, right? The collapse of the process is no longer settled. It's structural. The law department's not operating on incomplete information or on secondhand rumor. It was responding to a formal public records request. Aware of the ongoing investigation, aware of the licensing implications, I know Levesque was, and aware that actually, executive leadership was discussing legal avenues to deal with me. It was all in their emails. They were all included. It's in that posture that the law department's role was not optional, or advisory. It was mandatory. Ohio law places the duty of lawful records compliance squarely on the public office. The law department exists to ensure that the duty is met, not to help the city maneuver around it. That's it. Riley and Cruz should have made sure they were compliant. Now, under the authority of Law Director Patrick Riley and the Assistant Law Director Joseph Levesque, acting on behalf of the office of the City of Lorain's Law Department, the city issued categorical denials and minimizations. Records were described as non-existent. Requests were characterized as already fully answered. The city repeatedly took the position that there was nothing more to produce, that there was not qualified responses, that there was not a partial production, and that there was, and they were not partially produced with exemptions asserted, right? That's where they were definitive about their statements, right, of non-existence or completion. These positions cannot be reconciled with what the city was simultaneously doing. An investigation's been opened into me. A police chief had communicated externally about my professional fitness after having never met me. Executive leadership was discussing legal pathways to deal with me. Council was aware of this escalation and was CC'd through Mary Springowski and others, as well as the law department, as was Lorraine Ritchie, as was Tia Hill, and as were others. Other random citizens. Teresa Upton, the old county clerk, was CC'd. The fuck? Everybody was CC'd. Apparently, according to her, even in her email, she openly admits them to family and friends to protect herself. That's Mary. Yet, while all this was being generated and circled, the law department's written posture to the public was that nothing existed or nothing more could be produced, or that the contradiction is not technical, it's dispositive. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not allow a public office to alternate between mutually exclusive positions depending on the audience. A Public office cannot claim records are too voluminous to produce at one point, non-existent at another, and then later allow those same records to be selectively disclosed outside the statutory process. Volume is not an exception or an exemption. Inconvenience is not an exemption. Narrative management is not an exemption. Once existence is acknowledged, folks, denial becomes legally unattainable. What completes the loop is what happens next. Despite the law department's denials, investigative materials and communications from that same universe of records were later curated, transmitted by a council person named Mary to a private citizens outside the Public Records Act. That alone proves existence. It also proves control. Records do not curate themselves. Someone selected them. Someone sent them. Mary. Someone exercised discretion over who received them and how. Mary. That's the moment I saw that the law department's position collapsed entirely. If records truly do not exist and they do not or could not be shared, they could not have ever been shared, and if requests had truly been fully answered, there would have been nothing left to disclose. If exemptions applied, there would have been there would have been a statutory analysis of some sort. There would have been redactions, a log, all these things that they argued for months not to give us and then finally give us. None of that occurred. Instead, records were denied through formal channels and disclosed through informal ones. They'd say no on one hand, but give them to Lorraine Ritchie no matter what. Without being even requested. Here you go, Lorraine. That's not delay. That's not misunderstanding. That's not even administrative sloppiness. It's a bifurcated system where the law is invoked to block one person and bypass, so to speak, to benefit another. Once that happens, the law department's role kind of shifts from guardian to compliance to the architect of the installation of the criminal act or the act. Whether by action or acquiescence, the office allowed a structure where statutory safeguards applied selectively. That's precisely what public records law is designed to prevent. Equal access is not suggestion, right? It's the core principle. When equal access fails, transparency fails with it. When you look at the fact Mary gave all the emails to Lorraine Ritchie unredacted, and the law department thinks they can redact stuff. I CC my lawyer on everything. Does that mean everything that I CC'd him on is suddenly legal advice? That means that they have to not share any of mine. That's the bullshit of that statement. At this point of the record, this no longer needs to be inferred. The contradiction speaks for itself, right? Records denied under color of law were nevertheless available when disclosure served a different purpose. The law department's denials did not stop with disclosure. They redacted or redirected it. And that's the final evidentiary hand, folks. Like, this is where we come to the conclusion of this whole big bunch of bullshit with Ray and all these people and, all the things they said is when the process is abandoned, the paper trail tells the truth always. The story does not require speculation, embellishment, or emotional framing. It requires only that the record be read in order. I, a resident, provided statutory notice of an unlawful condition. I, a resident, asked for correction. The law wasn't rebutted. Compliance didn't occur. Instead, officials escalated against me internally. An investigation was opened. Licensing implications were discussed. Executive leadership acknowledged in writing that the city was searching for legal avenues to deal with this person raising the issue. And also, on top of all of that, you had someone like Tia Hilton getting secondarily informed by James McCann to seek out, good luck seeking out, attacks against my CDCA licensure and advising her on other facts that were going on. Now, while that was happening, lawful, public records requests seeking documentation of that escalation by me were denied or minimized. The city took the position that McCann's emails didn't exist or had already been fully produced. Those positions were maintained until that kind of became inconvenient. Then, without a public records request, without a custodial review, without redactions, without statutory analysis, records from the same universe were selectively disclosed to a private citizen and Lorraine Ritchie and others. That act confirmed that what they had denied all along, that the records existed, they mattered, they were controlled. Criminal law was later rejected, later rejected the danger narrative that followed. Prosecutors declined to file charges against me. Law enforcement closed the matter, yet escalation has persisted through civil proceedings, media framing with the Chronicle, and selective disclosure. At no point was the original statutory violation meaningfully addressed in any way. At no point was the law rebutted, and at no point was the record corrected. This is not a story about tone or temperament, folks. It's a story about not even about disagreement or politics. It's about what happens when public officials choose narrative over statute, discretion over process, and containment over correction, and protect themselves. Public records law, due process protections, and anti-retaliation safeguards exist to prevent exactly this outcome. And when those safeguards are treated as obstacles instead of obligations, when the harm is not confined to one individual, it becomes institutional. It teaches officials that the law is optional when it's inconvenient and enforceable only when it's useful. The emails, the denials, the disclosures, the timing, they don't ask to be believed. They ask to be read. And once once they are read in sequence and you read them, the conclusion is going to be unavoidable. Anyway, with that, folks, I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. It's been a long one. I thank you for being here tonight to address all these issues with Ray Carrion and others. Go back. I have stories on my website, www.aaronnapunplug.com. Check out the WordPresses. Go to my Substack. Check out my Substack. Go to my Facebook. Check out my Facebook. These stories have been printed visually. They've been printed in print and in text for you to read. All the records that I provided that I talk about in this are all on that page. They're all out there. All you have to do is look. I do thank you for tuning in tonight. I do thank you for being here on this Monday. Yes, tomorrow, Lorraine City Schools, for those of you in this area, no school tomorrow because of the cold weather. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for being here. This is Aaron Knapp. Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time. Don't forget, tomorrow night, Tuesday night, 6 p.m., City Council meeting. Be there. They have usually a meeting before that, a committee meeting at 5:30. So head on down, check that out. Thanks for tuning in, and you make it a wonderful night. Law enforcement, be lawful, not awful. The rest of Lorraine, you guys make it a wonderful night. And everyone in Ohio, stay warm.